flying. And where else are we going to go? Boom, 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 boom. Can I go full screen? Um, God, what was the button again to go get this?
Oh, handsome. How do we make the PowerPoint go full screen?
That was full screen. And how do I do? Okay,
Which one?
I have full screen. I think the problem is that we can't do full screen and Discord at the same time for the time being. There probably is
Maybe
a way,
not.
guarantee.
Handsome, come here. Which could you show the button?
I have us anyway.
Right, Ryan is literally a PowerPoint expert, so.
Aye.
Oh, okay. So if you go, if
This
this
is
is it.
it.
So go to the bottom of the screen with a little slider that shows you how big it is. The little screen that's right next to the
Mm.
less zoom in.
Yeah, I clicked it anyway, but the problem is I can't do, for the time being, I'll actually experiment with the OBS, so I
We
can go
think it
full
might be
screen and get us in at the same time. Um,
because we can't be in it if it's full screen. So,
yeah,
yeah, that's what I found out. Are we live yet? Oh, I think we are. What I was trying to tell you. Good morning, everyone. Uh, um, I've actually discovered how to use OBS in a much better, more efficient way that you can more customize the size of all the different screens and all
mm,
that. We can delve into that when we have more time at some other point.
yeah. You see, the problem is, oh, this one.
No, go down. See where it says zoom in, like at the
Yeah.
bottom
Well,
right.
you
There's
see, the
that
problem
little
with
that little
that one
that little
is
guy should
that
is do it.
which one? This one.
That
You see,
one.
the
Yeah.
problem with that one is I can't
Yeah.
show everything at once. What are you thinking?
Yeah, well, no, we'd have to. No, we well for the next one, we'll look out. We can experiment with OBS and setting up
Alright,
different
cool.
input screens. Yeah.
Alright, which one?
Okay, we are live. Yes.
Let go. That probably worked. Oh no, it didn't. Oh, is it this one? I know it's not working.
Okay, well,
That's okay.
let's do a sound check. Can everyone hear us? Are we all audible and hopefully
I'm
visible?
actually. Oh, am I hiding Rachel? Give us one moment. We're just moving things around. Where am I? Sorry about this, everyone. What am I doing? Okay, click on the bottom row.
First,
Give us 1 minute. Sorry about this, Rachel. You want
no,
me to
it's
click this,
okay.
Yuki?
But of course, the good Susan says she can hear us, so that's a good first step.
Why is it, Yuki? Untick that, right? No, it's untickable. Remember, look, I've been clicking it for ages. I think this is the problem we've had this morning.
A baygoer, whom can't you hear?
There we go. Oh yeah, how do I do that then? Okay, perfect. Well, at least we got that one going anyway. Thanks for that, Yuki. And I'll fly over here. Right. And who am I hiding then, Yuki? Okay, give us 1 second. You want me to move here, is it? Yeah, there I am. Okay, perfect. Right. Fixing things on the fly. And perfect. So the sound now isn't working, is it, Susan?
Oh, right, great. Baygoer is just pulling our leg because,
It's okay.
don't
So
do that. We are very delicate when it comes to whether you can hear us or see us or not. This has been a problem in the past.
I had this perfectly set up on Wednesday, and I go do the test then, and YouTube's gone off and reset everything this morning. So the joys.
It has. Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live stream on crime and punishment in the 15th century. We're excited to hopefully discuss to you today, uh, but to also dispel some myths, because there are some bad ones floating around about medieval and 15th century, and specifically crime and punishment.
Oh, stop. It's very, very bad. We mostly started off, I'll switch over to the PowerPoint again. Oh, yeah. This is one thing you've been talking about all week, Rachel, that I actually wanted to bring up first as we go into the news and stuff. The main reason we're covering crime and punishment this week is because we actually started off Monday with Henry. There was a reaction to what was going on over at YouTube, to certain trailers to Henry being caught. In the previous, if you're unaware, there's a video game set in the 15th century in Bohemia, just going into the Hussite Wars and stuff. There's kind of fighting between the various two kings during I think they were part of the Luxembourg dynasty, and they're fighting over the kingship of Bohemia, and eventually also pushing over to become emperors of the Holy Roman Emperor as well, kind of competing over that as well at the same time. Um, However, there's a video game set during this whole period where you play as the character Henry. And in the previous game, Henry was kind of getting away with a lot of crimes and stuff. However, in this game, because it's even more realistic than it was before, Henry, during the trailers and stuff, wasn't really getting away with the punishments that he was, sorry, the crimes that he was getting away with last time. And so the internet was kind of shocked and appalled when trailers started to come out about what could happen to Henry. But we'll talk about that in a bit. Myself and Rachel started this week actually talking about. Rachel was doing a bit of research, as she's going to be publishing a video onto my channel sometime this week. And during your research, Rachel, you were telling me that you found a good bit on farting and stuff.
Yeah, this is I was actually, so it's in the Irish sources where I started.
Mm,
And I found this manuscript from Ireland from the 14th century. It was actually a compilation of folios, and there was a seating chart for the banqueting hall at Tara.
mm.
And on that seating chart was a slot for a professional farter. And I said to myself, is this really a thing? Is this an Irish thing? And so that led me to dig, and I discovered the profession to the present day, by the way, of the flatulist, the person who can control their intestinal wind, thus that they may make music with it.
Mm,
And yeah, so apparently people have been laughing at not just fart jokes, but farting for literally centuries.
mm,
Henry II of England had a flatulist he so loved that he gave him an roll into the farter, that he gave him an estate. And in fee for that estate, all this man had to do was at Christmas give one performance of a whistle, a jump, and a fart.
mm.
And all he had to do. So, yeah, apparently this was a going concern, at least in Northern Europe. I have to confess, I didn't find any evidence of flatulists in Southern Europe, but I didn't also spend hours pouring through sources. I didn't think it was that important, but uh, yeah, flatulism is a thing. And so anytime now I see these little guys in the marginalia, as you see here, of illuminated manuscripts, I'm no longer just going to dismiss it as medieval fantasy, but realize that it's possibly the depiction of someone actually performing with their intestinal winds, as
I
it's called in the original sources.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. Just one second there. Susan has a question for us, I think. Did Belgium have a music making part time in medieval Ireland? Yeah, when it comes down to farting and stuff, you do see there's actually a manuscript. Well, obviously Rachel has found more stuff on it, but we do have a wood carving from the Tudor period that actually depicts a person farting over a fire. All right, so it's quite popular in Ireland, and we've got a few more coming in there. We also have modern farters. They're called politicians. Thank you, thank you. That's actually brilliant.
So
Yeah.
I'm not certain about belching. I didn't find any references to belching, but it was the references I found were all to intestinal winds.
Mm,
Um, but I can also see how someone who can control the winds at one end might also be able to control the winds at the other end. So I could see professional belchers as being maybe equally in demand.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
I,
have seen circus performers and stuff doing belching jokes and stuff, so I could easily imagine that happening. All right.
yeah, I have to confess I have not found proof positive of professional belchers, but give me a couple of days and I'll find it probably.
I absolutely no problems. Let me jump over
Uh,
to the next slide. Oh yes, the armor of the Irish kings. Yeah, there's been kind of back and forth and more of a conversation that I've been having with people within my community. Especially this week, Ramblin' Kern has kind of elaborated on what myself and Connor were talking about with our 15th century work, all right, especially to do with the Anglo-Irish. Um, it was interesting, all right, because the Ramblin' Kern kind of added onto the conversation that we were already having that in Ireland, a lot of the Anglo-Irish knights have two, maybe three or four sets of armor and stuff,
mm,
and they would actually have armor from the continent in Pacific. We assume most likely that they had more of the English style of armor. However, it's very interesting that they're buried with this sort of kind of Anglo-Irish armor that's very
yeah. It's
arcane.
very distinct. It's very distinctive to Ireland, this style that I've seen on all these effigies.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you would assume that they would be buried in the more superior armor, more kind of European armor perhaps, or English armor, and yet they're not. They're buried in this kind of arcane warrior
Mm.
style armor. It does bring up a kind of debate and argument to why specifically they're buried in this. But yeah, Ramblin' Kern had elaborated with many examples this week. So if you haven't seen this video already, definitely like pop over to my channel, zoom right down to the bottom where you can find Ramblin' Kern, or type Ramblin' Kern into the search, and definitely check out his new video on the armor of the Irish Knight, where he gives loads of examples and actually elaborates on to what myself and Connor were saying 2 weeks ago, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago, on our video on 15th century gallows glass, when we had
So
slightly touched on this.
here's what I also discovered when I was looking at effigies for clothing.
Mm,
So, and this is true as an art historian, I can tell you that what the way people are depicted is not necessarily indicative of what they were actually wearing at the time they died. And there is definitely in Ireland specifically an interesting petrification and stylization of effigy sculptures.
mm,
So, for example, Margaret Fitzgerald dies in the 1540s, and she and her husband are buried in armor that looks exactly clothing and armor not buried. Sorry, their effigies are sculpted. She's wearing an ensemble that could absolutely be from the 1440s,
mm,
and he's wearing armor that is also depicted on knights who have effigies from the early 15th century in Ireland. So I would question whether that's reflective of actual armor
mm,
or a stylized armor. Until I find until he, and now if he has examples of actual armor, like pieces,
mm,
real armor, not sculpted armor, then I would, tend to believe that is actually more something they would have actually worn rather than a stylized thing.
mm, mm.
So that's my caveat when it comes to art. Art alone is not evidence. You need ideally you need your three prongs. You need your extant examples, your archaeology. You need art, and then documentary is of course the third prong.
Yeah.
So that's my caveat when it comes to using art as a basis for arms or arms, armor, and clothing.
Mm, mm. That's quite interesting. All right. But yeah, you definitely because there's very little finds. We have one or two finds here and there, and Ramblin' Kern kind of does put that in his video and stuff. But you're right, there does need to be far more finds, far more elaboration and stuff into it. So hopefully we'll get more money and we'll start digging up more stuff and we'll start getting more finds in
Absolutely.
there.
And I'm not shooting down
Mm,
specifically the Rambling Karen's research at all. That's not. I just like to put that out there that for research, it's important that you
yeah.
have more than just art because art is not necessarily was not necessarily ever intended to be a photograph,
Mm.
right? It served a purpose. It served especially in these effigies, this is a sign of wealth, it's a sign of power, which means you're going to depict your deceased in a way that conveys wealth and power. And that, after a while, weirdly, especially in Ireland, can take on a completely stylized aspect. Like I said, I was shocked when this effigy I had of Margaret Fitzgerald, and I went to look up when she died. It's like 1540, but she looks like she's wearing clothes from 1510.
Mm.
So there was, and then her, I forget, who cares about her husband, but he was some Fitzgerald, and
Mm.
he he died. He also he's wearing the armor like you see right there on in the screen, even though it's the 1540s. So yeah, just caveat, make sure you have more than art to back up your theories if you can have more than art.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating as well because like you can't turn around and saying that these people are dressing arcane all the time because these people are also very active inside of the London court. Like even when you
Right.
have the Butler Talbot feud, which is supposed to be the Irish versus the English, there's a moment where Talbot is in France fighting Joan of Arc, and the Butlers and the Fitzgeralds are like, "Hey, the butlers turn around to the Fitzgeralds and say, "Do you want to go see my cousins in England?" And they're like, "Yeah, yeah." And they
Right.
hop in a boat and they go see their cousins in England. And afterwards, when you're in the period of the War of the Roses, which is when most of these effigies are made, the
Right.
Fitzgeralds and the Butlers are fully active inside the London court. And we know because of the statutes of Kilkenny and various other laws that they had to wear dress, English dress, and that they were, we have loggings and stuff from Bristol that there was trade coming in from France and from various other parts of Europe
Oh yeah.
into England, and then from England, specifically Bristol, into Dublin, and then from there, all this clothing would have gotten into Ireland. Never mind the clothing, as Rachel's done plenty of research into, from Florence into the Iberian Peninsula, and then up into Europe. So it is very fascinating, and it's definitely something myself and Connor will look more into this week as we start to explore into the arms and armor of the 15th century. So definitely pay attention
Yeah.
to that one this week. So I decided to chuck that in for another bit of news as well. Expanding
Oh,
onto that. Oh, yeah.
we have a question about the flatulists. Does anyone know anything of modern flatulists? They are still active. Flatulists apparently are still professionally performing. Howard Stern apparently used to have professional farters on his show on a regular basis. So yeah, that's still a going concern. Let me see. There's just some chatter, clarification on the rambling current. Yeah, the rambling kern, not current. Okay, yeah, onward.
Yeah, you sent me this one on the Iron
Oh,
Age
right.
helmet, wasn't it?
Uh, film?
Was it a Roman helmet? I think I was reading. Oh no, this was
Uh,
the other one, wasn't it?
yeah, the kiln. Yeah, so they just discovered their, okay, so people might not know in Europe, and of course in the United Kingdom, which I consider part of Europe, but whatever.
Mm.
Anytime you go to build something, you have to have an archaeological survey of the site, unlike America, where you just build things and whatever. So, of course, they're trying to build this recreation center in England, and they uncovered, as part of their archaeological survey, this really well preserved medieval pottery kiln. And this is rare. You don't really often find these because of industrial production. It was mass production, medieval style.
Mm.
Unfortunately, apparently they're going to cover it up again and continue building the site.
Yeah.
And they claim that the survey they did will be enough to make sure we understand this site forever. And I'm just the thought of covering, instead of like carving it out of the ground wholesale and taking it to a museum, or in Korea, what they do when they find a site like this,
Hmm.
they actually redesign the building to go around it, and so that there's like some kind of glass box around it so you can still look at it and it's preserved, but the building is still there and it's like part of the building instead of just being covered up. but I guess no one thought about that here, and it makes me sad.
It's just absolutely insanity to me because the exact same thing is happening in Ireland where there's dozens of finds now coming up from Vikings to Romans to all kinds of stuff being found in Ireland, and it's the same attitude of builders and all these councillors are just like, oh, that's great, okay, start putting some cement over it there. It's absolute insanity, and then they're all scratching their heads saying, why doesn't enough tourists coming to the country? It's just, and then at the other side of it, because I've worked on the tourist side, then they expect all the money. They don't put money into tourism, they do everything to handicap tourism, and then they expect a big, large sum of money at the end of the day. And it's just like, you people are all insane. You need to stop
Yeah.
drinking your brains away and start using them to make money because Ireland and Britain, it is so easy because we have so much history to sell to people, and yet we have councillors that do everything in their power to destroy as much history as possible. They're insane.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, it's like there's like I said, Korea's come up with the creative solutions. They just redesign the building
yeah.
to incorporate it and make sure that it's there for the public to see. And instead, they're just apparently going to cover it up, rebury it, and continue on. And I can't imagine there's any way they're going to be able to rebury it and not damage it
Oh,
by building this recreation building.
yeah, yeah. It was the exact same thing in Cork City as well. I could literally bitch about this all day because Kilmallock did that. They actually just got glass and they put it around the finds and stuff. So people now walking into the shops and stuff straight away can see all these finds. It's made a part of the building. But in Cork City, it was the same thing again, where they found all these finds and they were just like, "Oh, that's great. Okay, so get the cement out there. We need to build past this." Like, it's like these people are absolutely insane. But yeah,
Oh,
I'll have to move on because I could easily just go on a rampage bitching about that.
yeah.
Yes, we're talking about medieval pubs as well. Stephen Tubble this week had a great article. Mostly overall, he's trying to advertise his new book, Crusader
Mm.
Criminals. And from the article that he had written on drinking pubs in the Middle East, and specifically in Jaffa, it sounds absolutely fascinating. Basically, the Crusaders, when they moved into the Middle East, they'd opened up a pub in Jaffa, and it had fighting and crimes became usual in that pub. And so Stephen thought it would be a wonderful idea to compose a book around various crimes that happened during the Crusader period. But one thing that really stood out for him when he was writing this, according to his article that he'd written, was all the crimes that was happening in Jaffa in this one pub. That even Egypt was writing about this at this period, about the sins that these Christians are committing, and the ceremony, what was it, the preaching that the church would go on. Basically bitching about this one pub, telling the Crusaders to stay away from the pub, specifically this one in Jaffa. When I was reading it this week, I just found it was absolutely fascinating. And even the book seems like it's going to be a very fascinating book to read.
It definitely looks like this one actually I when you mentioned we were going to talk about this pub fighting,
Mm,
I realized what you were talking about because I saw the article on the release of this book as well.
yeah.
It looks like it's going to be I'm hoping it will be one of those really well informed pop history books.
Mm,
I love I don't have a snobbery against pop history because it's the way that history can reach the average person and not just geeks like us.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm all in favor of that, as long as there's actually good, solid, information provided in the book and not just, a series of melodramatic scenes. But yeah, if you ever want to read melodrama though about the Crusades, the Arab historians of the Crusades write in the most delightfully melodramatic manner. I actually have a book on my shelf called The Arab Historians of the Crusades. It's just a collection
Mm.
of primary source chronicles told from the perspective. And I think I remember reading the Arab, the that Egyptians that from Egypt, the description of this pub in that chronicle, and the terms that he actually says, "God damn their eyes,"
uh,
because of how corrupt they are. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
It's absolutely
Trader
brilliant.
Signal.
Um, just moving on slightly. Okay, so let's get started this day. First and foremost, last week we were going through the trailers because Kingdom Come Deliverance, the second game to this kind of continuous
Yeah.
games that are coming out. I think Susan was watching me play it a few times, all right. I don't know what Susan thought of my madness as I was going around doing absolute insanity in the game because I was a complete lunatic while I was playing it this week. But last weekend we had a trailer that was coming up and it kind of shocked the entire population of YouTube and Twitch at the time because in the previous game everyone's strategy at the very start was to when Henry he became notoriously famous for being hungry all the time, so what people would do was that they would break into other people's homes and steal their food. And of course, Warhorse Studio, who were the creators of Kingdom Come Deliverance, who were setting their game just before the Hussite Wars in 1403, they thought it would be a wonderful idea to advertise the fact that if you try to do this at the start of the game, you're going to get punished. And there's severe punishments in this game, and it pretty much inspired us this week to do an entire video on crimes and punishments. However, as we quickly found out this week, and it's something we might talk about a little bit, that's not how entirely, when the game was finally released, what actually happened. Because what happened is that people very quickly got a bit of money, specifically probably from stealing, perhaps, and then selling it on to other people. And then they would just pay their way out of fines. I think you were when I was telling you about this, Rachel. I think you quickly looked up fines in Bohemia, and you couldn't really find anything. I think you were saying.
Yeah, yeah. So I last minute find. So first off, researching anything from medieval Bohemia is super tricky
Mm,
because there's, in my case, a language barrier. Czech is not one of my languages, and there's not a lot that's been published in English.
mm,
But I did find some things. And what I found is that Bohemia in the 15th century is in the point, well, it's the Hussite Wars, so transition is kind of comes with the territory, but it's in any case transitioning from a period where Slavic law, tradition, like old school migratory Slavic people law,
mm,
was in practice and transitioning towards Roman law.
mm,
So under Old Slavic law, they had a kind of weregeld system where you could pay compensation to the victim
mm.
and then be forgiven of your crime, right? But if you couldn't pay the compensation, then there was something more severe. But kind of I wasn't able to find anything about fines specifically in this period in Bohemia. So I can't confirm whether that's true or not, but I definitely found lots of confirmation of corporal punishment for crimes in this era. Lots of evidence of that. So I don't know whether I cannot confirm that paying a fine for 1403 Bohemia, or I don't know, is this 1403,
Yeah,
1402, or we jump
1403.
forward?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
It's just in
1403, right?
1403. Yeah, yeah.
I wasn't I wasn't able to confirm that. I found a lot of other interesting things about how justice, law enforcement and justice in especially in like Kutna Hora, the major silver mine. But yeah, fines, I don't know. The other thing about fines is that that's a pay to play kind of
Yeah.
situation, and the average person is probably not going to have cash to just pay that kind of
Yeah,
fine.
which is very true because like the thing is that straight from the get-go when this game does start, I think everybody's kind of spoiled at this stage of how the game starts, and that is, well, especially if you've been paying attention to my channel, and that's the fact that at the very start, Henry is attacked by bandits. He's pretty much stripped naked at the very start of it, um, and then you
That's
have
a
to make
rough beginning.
yeah, it's a very rough beginning for himself and Hans. And so he has to basically make himself out into the world and find his own kit. And so you're pretty much stripped down, but it causes the player, because, Henry's a bit wild, to probably commit thievery and various other bits and bobs to get his money up, or even go around the forest trying to, assassinate bandits and taking their stuff, perhaps. So you're able to sell this stuff on and make a profit very quickly from being a bit insane. That it's not really a
Right.
sane thing to be doing in this day and age. So
Mm-mm.
you're going to get a bit of money very quickly to be able to pay off fines and stuff. So Henry isn't a normal normal human being. You know, it's not normal for a peasant or anyone who's living out in these countrysides and stuff to be, going into a forest line to, assassinate bandits at nighttime and stuff. Although plenty of my players who were watching my channel this week noticed that I committed this insane psycho frenzy of spending my day as a blacksmith, and then at nighttime I would sneak
Right.
around the bandit camps, committing various atrocities. That's not kind of the sane way to play and stuff. So yeah, it is definitely interesting that, like, especially that of 248, a common peasant wouldn't have 248 in the back of their pocket.
It's not, and yeah, and I mean, yeah, just hauling around that kind of money on your person, it's a bad plan anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And we actually have a couple of questions. Begor asks about the pillory. Yes, we will get to the specific forms of punishment. Got a whole presentation on it. Pillory is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
And then his other question is corporal punishment might make more might I can't, my stupid little heart is right above the live chat. Anyway, might draw more attention. Yeah, so actually that is kind of the general thing that's happening. This transition in a lot of parts of Europe from like the 13th to the 15th centuries, there's a resurgence of Roman law.
Mm,
So for a while, kind of the old laws of the original peoples who migrated in and took over from the Roman Empire, the Germanic tribes, right? They were all weregeld systems
mm,
where you paid a fine to the victim. But now that's Germanic law.
mm.
And now in the 15th, 14th, and 15th century, there's a resurgence of Roman law, and Roman law is demonstrative and punitive. And so the idea is that social order can be created. This pervades most of Europe. We'll talk about Ireland in a minute.
Oh yeah.
Um, but this idea that you need to demonstrate the punishment publicly as a deterrent is is part of Roman law, and that starts to become so. That's why you have things like the pillory. It's about making the punishment as public as possible, so that no one else wants to commit that crime.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that kind of backfires in Ireland. We'll talk a wee bit about that in a second as we get delve in deeper. What's my next little slide? Oh yes, it was this one here as we move into punishments and stuff. I thought I'd put up this slide first because it kind of that's kind of the main one that Henry would go after first. Was rather, get the old slap of the cane rather than actually pay money, which is kind of a choice you can actually take in Kingdom Come. Rachel, what exactly is happening in this photo
So
here?
this is gruesome by very modern standards. So when wives transgressed, there were legal and socially acceptable manages of methods of disciplining them,
Mm,
and there were legally unacceptable ones, right?
mm,
So in this case, this wife has done committed some transgression against her husband. Maybe she was shrew-like, maybe she nagged him, and so he's actually allowed to cane her
mm.
with a stick like this.
Aye.
Um, so this is the only like image we could find of actually beating someone with a cane, a stick like they do in Kingdom Come. But here you can see that that scene from Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is not wrong. They did in fact have what looks like a yardstick, and you could use that to administer discipline,
To your
as
own
it were.
wife. It's very
Yeah.
interesting because I actually did cover a little bit of a short on this, on the kind of objectifying of women of the medieval period and the patriarchy. So if you definitely want to check that out, I have a short that I covered this week on that one, the patriarchy in Ireland, which is a bit of a touchy subject because people look at it from a
Mm.
very modern perspective. Where in the short, I'm trying to pull people back to a more of a medieval perspective of why historians, even the Victorian historians, would consider this more of a patriarchy period rather than, a period of equality. So yeah, if you want to know more information on this, definitely check out my short on this. And yeah, that imagery kind of pops up here again, so I decided to chuck this one in just to get us
Mhm.
a nice warmed up before we get into more of the gruesome stuff.
Yeah,
Because these are one of the punishments, another punishment that myself and Rachel were looking at when we seen Kingdom Come's trailer previous week, where Henry decides he's not going to pay the fine of 248, and instead he's going to take
yeah.
one of these punishments instead, which actually does happen in the game. Rachel, would you be able to elaborate on this a wee bit?
Yeah, so this man, so what we have here is potentially mob justice because you can see there's a very angry looking crowd behind him. But basically, you get this man is actually being beaten out of town.
Uh,
So this is a combination punishment of of being driven out of town with sticks. So if you ever read about people being exiled from town, it wasn't necessarily, the you go home, you pack, you get your things together, and then you go and visit your cousin in the neighboring town. No, in some cases you were literally stripped down to your skivvies, your hands were bound, and you were driven out of town on a tether. And then once you were beyond the bounds, you were just kind of left to make do as you could in your stripped down state. So yeah, that's the I forget what actual historical scene this is depicting, but this is a punishment that was administered in various places in Europe. And Europe is not a monolith, everyone, but there are definitely some similarities when it comes to crime and punishment across a lot of the continent and England even.
yeah, I can.
But we have a couple of questions. We have what's Roman law? Um, so Roman law was ancient Roman law. So this was law as practiced in ancient Rome, and it's a completely different theory of crime and punishment versus Germanic law, which was the law as practiced in sort of amongst the German tribes that came through in like the second through fifth centuries of AD. And so there were two completely different systems. The Germanic tribes actually had much more humane laws and were much more practical. Their view was crime was a personal matter, an interpersonal matter, and so you could pay compensation, and that's what weregeld is. That's the middle or early, excuse me, Old English term were from like werewolf, were, means person, means man, means human, and geld is the Old English word for money. So it was literally money you paid to a person or to their family if you killed them for committing a crime against them. So this compensation that we're talking about, that's just the Old English word for it. So yeah, there's in the Middle Ages you have this constant tension between a system of Roman law, meaning ancient Roman law, and then the system of Germanic law. And eventually Germanic law just kind of gets mostly done away with, only kind of kept in sort of these drips and drabs, and Roman law becomes ascendant again in starting in like the 13th century.
That's
Uh,
very fascinating, especially when it's a period where you see kind of the reforms of the church and stuff happening a lot going into the 13th century. Even in Ireland, although you had the Gregorian reform very early on, Ireland continues to have reform after reform after reform because there's this
right,
continuous fear in Ireland that it's under this kind of how modern historians would label Celtic Christianity, or at the time the papacy would just refer to as heresy. So there's
right.
this constant reform, and it doesn't help when you've got propaganda. A lot of it is just outright propaganda from the likes of Gerald of Wales and stuff, of justifying large amount of land grabbing happening in Ireland. Oh well, those people were heretics, so it made it a-okay for my local
Right,
Cambro-Norman family to take up all that land and stuff, and no one really questions it then. In Europe, when you've got all these
yeah.
Cambro-Normans driving these native Gaelic people off their land and territory, so yeah, those kind of reforms and stuff comes in handy for subjugating and taking someone else's land with no real other just cause.
So we have a good question, and Susan brings this up. Didn't the stick have thickness levels beyond which you couldn't go? The rule of thumb. Yes, that is correct. So in English we have the expression the rule of thumb. It actually can apply to a couple of different things, but they often use the thumb as sort of a calibration for a lot of different things. But one of the things for which in the medieval world the rule of thumb was used was, yeah, you couldn't beat your wife with a stick thicker than your thumb. And if you did, then it would actually be considered assault. And then you might face serious consequences for that. Because it's, in the medieval, just like now, in the medieval world, crime and punishment wasn't a matter of sadism. It was a matter of maintaining order,
Mm.
social order, and making sure that there was peace and prosperity in your community. So beating your wife to the point of being mutilated and almost dying will not ensure peace and prosperity in your community. So there were consequences for actually using a stick that was way too heavy and that rendered the victim damaged. There's one case where the husband actually beat his wife to death, and I'm sorry, I should have said this is a trigger warning. There's one case in which a wife followed her husband down to the pub apparently to continue nagging him,
Mm.
and he lost his temper and apparently beat her to the point where she died of her wounds. And when they tried him for it, they came up with this bizarre talk around where they said, well, she didn't actually take care of herself properly after she was injured. And because she failed to do her wifely duty and take care of her wounds, she's actually the reason she's dead, not the beating. And so they let the husband off. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, right. Yeah. Unfortunately, I have seen such logic applied in modern American courts as well. So I can't really
Yeah.
say we're much better.
Yeah. y- Okay, we're going down the old evil rabbit hole here, so we'll just keep plowing along.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's crime and punishment. I hope none of you were expecting bunnies and puppies this morning.
Yeah, God. So with some people that come into the chat, you got to question. It's like the title literally is Crimes and Punishment. It's going to get a bit wild very, very quickly. The only thing I'm hoping for is that YouTube kind of gives us a bit of a leeway, especially when I clicked on the button, no kids, this isn't made for children.
Right. Yeah. Nope.
um,
Not made for children at
yeah,
all.
but we'll still have to follow the old rules and say SA a lot, so we'll move on anyway. um, have we covered the questions on sticks? Man being beaten out of town still has its underwear on. Yeah, I suppose we'll have to take his underwear off, but I suppose that's not really, you
Oh,
wouldn't really be able to get away with that either because of the whole thing of nudity being a sin and stuff. I think maybe we'll have to put a bit of cloth on his genital area anyway. What do you think of
well,
that, Rachel?
so
He still would have to have his
yeah,
covering that part.
so not necessarily. So I actually have a whole video about medieval women's underwear. Highly polemic topic, by the way.
Mm.
But I also discussed men's underwear there as well because I have a theory that the reason men are nearly always depicted, like 99.9% of the time, if they're naked
Mm.
in medieval art, they're wearing their brace.
Mm.
But if women are naked in medieval art, they aren't. And I actually have a theory that it has to do with the people who were doing the art being men,
Yeah.
actually. Um, and it's actually possibly easier to draw underpants, braids, breeches than it is to draw the relative genitalia. I
Oh,
actually,
well, that's very
so
true.
I'm not certain whether this art represents the reality of how far stripped down is,
Mm.
or if it's just an artistic convention of that's where everyone kind of tacitly agreed, yeah, we're always going to draw men with their underwear on. The exception is the scene where Abelard and Eloise get caught by her brothers and they go to castrate him.
Mm.
Then they always show him fully naked, but otherwise, you almost never see male genitalia in medieval art. And I have a feeling that's got to do with convention of art and depiction of men versus women and the sexism that's there as well, rather than actual practice.
Mm.
But that's a theory. They may have left him with his skivvies. I mean, you've got to leave a man with something, I guess, but also maybe they didn't want to touch his skivvies because,
Yeah.
ooh.
Yeah. God, just put wild images in my head now. But moving on. Because God, we're jumping back down a rabbit hole here. We're meant to keep to crimes and punishments. Hessa's channel. She's right down at the bottom. Click on that one, and she has endless amount of videos on underwear and loads of different clothing of the 15th century. But God, we could talk about that all day.
Yeah.
Just the
Ah,
one about the old,
scourge.
yeah, another weapon that might appear in 15th century, Bohemia with our poor. Hopefully Henry doesn't see it. Not my playthrough anyway. Someone's going to see it at some stage. I have seen this flying around the place in Bohemia. What's this weapon about, Rachel?
So This is a scourge.
Ah,
This is for flagellation. And this is actually what is in the, I can't believe I just my earphones are. What is in the little plastic box are the extant bits they found in a monastery.
mm,
And it's actually wire weaving, which is the same technique used to make the chains from which pendants and brooches are suspended. So it's a little disturbing that a technique that can be used to make beautiful jewelry is also was also used to make something with which you would flagellate. So this was actually probably, they think, a flagellant's flog,
mm.
but they can't be certain. It could have also been the kind of flog you would use to punish someone when you had to face the punishment of flogging. And if you think being flogged with leather is bad,
Mm.
being flogged with a wire woven flog is way worse.
Yeah, I
Way
can
worse.
imagine. Depictions of poor Jesus in the Bible comes to mind, being whipped. He goes into his punishment and stuff. And I remember watching the movie on that one, and that was quite hardcore. So one could imagine how terrible that would be in real life to witness that in front of you. I remember
Yeah.
even what was it, the Outlander, which is set in the
Mm.
17th century, which has a flogging scene, is pretty tough to watch for a lot of people, and would have happened at the time as well. So yeah, tough going back in the day. We'll
So
just
we have a couple of questions. Death and after the Black Death, when the plague kept resurging, there were a whole lot of people, monks, but also lay people, who thought they needed to punish themselves to putrefy their flesh,
mm,
to atone for the sins of humanity, so that God would stop sending these plagues. And so they would literally take that metal wire woven thing you see there on that screen, and they would beat themselves on their backs with it. And there's still people who do this, actually. So it's where you flog yourself, and you would lay your back open. There would be blood. It would not be a pretty, it's not just where, oh, you get some welt. No, no, no. That's going to open your skin and scar.
mm.
So that's what self-flagellation is. Do you know anything about flagellants in Ireland?
Yeah, it
Is
would have
that
been
was
popped up all right because we have the all the different holy orders that come into Ireland, and it was mostly like the plague itself, and then you had a resurgence of it going into the late 14th century as well.
right?
And it's mostly the city settlements, the Anglo-Irish side, that would have seen the worst of the Black Death, and of course that's also the areas where you see a lot of these holy orders like the Franciscans and Dominicans and all that, open up all
Right.
their abbeys and stuff. And so yeah, this would have been a part of all of these experiences, especially around Waterford and stuff, where you have, as we go into the 15th century, you have effigies of people, kind of, how we say, I wouldn't say romanticize the idea, but kind of highlighting and reminding people that, hey, if you're not good in this life, you're going to burn in an eternal hell. The mayor
Right.
of Waterford has a famous effigy of him pretty much skinned. He wasn't skinned alive in real life, but the reason why he had this effigy was to remind people of death, and
Right.
about if you're not good for your sins, you're going to go and burn in hell and stuff. So yeah, this imagery and all this is 100% a part, especially part of the Anglo-Irish life in the southeast of the country. So you would have seen this sort of depictions and all this stuff as well in Ireland, just as you would have seen it in England and on the continent of Europe. Just moving on slightly there to the next one before we run out of time. Yes, this one looks like a nasty little one. Would you be able to
Yeah.
elaborate on this one, Rachel?
So this is actually a rack.
Mm,
If you've ever heard of a rack, this is a rack at Honeborg, which is a castle north of Frankfurt, and one of the few extant medieval castles left in Germany, because most of them were destroyed during the 30 Years' War. So you can go to the castle and see and touch this. They let you can get on it. They're not really picky about their artifacts there.
mm,
So it's a rack. So you would actually be stretched on this rack. So you can see there's a pulley, and you can see those manacles at one end and the place for neck and feet at the other. The manacles are for your feet, your
mm,
head, neck, and hand, or your neck and hands go in that yoke at the other end. And then they literally stretch you, dislocating your joints
mm,
until you till you talk. Actually, the rack was usually not a form of punishment at this period. It was mostly a form of interrogation
Mm,
because, especially for high crimes like treason, it was, or God forbid, witchcraft, although that's more 16th, 17th century.
mm,
Um, if you they it was almost believed as though a confession, the theory was, and this is Roman law again,
mm.
the theory is that unless you give your confession under torture, it can't actually possibly be true, which is it's not that's like the opposite of the truth, actually. Under torture, you'll say anything to get them to stop, anything.
Mm,
But
which is very
this
true.
was a way to, right? If you're causing me pain, I'll say whatever you want me to say. It's not going to be the truth, but I'll say what you want.
I think that's the
Um,
problem, though. A lot of the time with this torture, it's them trying to
yeah,
get their interpretation and make that to be true. Especially if you're
right,
dealing with a lot of the religious fanatics, like the Inquisition and stuff, where they're trying to portray their rivals or factions or various ethnic groups as being evil,
right.
and they're the bad people. So we'll pick out certain people from that group. We'll get a confession from them,
Yeah.
and then that way we get the conclusion that we want. And I think these devices definitely got those conclusions. But as we go into more of a modern period where we kind of want the truth and the actual truth of what happened, yeah, these devices quickly phase out. Like,
And the thing about the rack is
mm,
that it dislocates your joints.
mm,
And like, I mean, like all of them. And apparently in the 16th century, during when Mary the First, when they were torturing heretic Protestants, um, one woman was racked so badly that when they went to execute her, they had to carry her to the stake because her joints were so badly dislocated she couldn't walk.
mm,
So even though it maybe of the torture forms that might be the more gentle of them, it was still a pretty horrible thing to do to a person. But this was not, like I said, this was not used as a form of punishment. This was to get someone to confess to a crime.
mm.
But really, the rack was only used for high crimes. They wouldn't have put you on the rack for theft. They would have put you on the rack if
Uh,
they suspected you of something really bad like witchcraft, or treason.
so we're not going to see Henry on this anytime soon for committing murder or
No,
thievery.
he's too low level, man.
Ah, poor
He's
Henry.
a pawn.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Poor Henry. Just one or two questions there. One of which asking for more to cover more laws that are broken, which we'll be covering there in a bit. So don't panic there. And the second one is off Susan, who's asking about is the Rack Castle home of the castle? You can walk the battlements.
You can walk some of the battlements,
Mm.
but you can go up into the towers, and the towers are so tall that you can see Frankfurt from them.
Ah,
Um,
nice,
the
nice.
city of Frankfurt, the modern city of Frankfurt, like 15 kilometers away,
Mm.
because it's on the top of a volcanic spout. So go to Ronaburg.
Wow,
It's an amazing castle.
I definitely have to go check that out. All right. I'll pop over there to the next PowerPoint slide. And oh yeah, the Wheel of Death.
Deal.
I'm not quite. This is in Bohemia at the period, so I don't know if we'll end up seeing this in what was it, Kingdom Come or not. But it's in the realm of possibility, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, the wheel is, I mean, humans are so inventive.
Mm,
It's disturbing, actually. The kind of, if we took all of this creative energy and invested it in innovation for progress, just think of where we would be.
yeah, that's very
Um,
true.
yeah, so the wheel it can either be like this, where it's kind of horizontal, or it could have been vertical, but you would be strapped to it as this desiccated corpse is,
Mm,
and they would actually apply a hammer as you spun around. They would spin you and apply a hammer,
mm,
and the number of strokes would actually be specified in your sentence. The
mm,
judge would say how many strokes. The judge would also say whether you worked from the top up or the bottom down, or rather from outside in.
mm,
And if your crime wasn't too egregious, if it was just regular homicide and not homicide and rape and some other horrible things, then they might actually start with a stroke to your head,
oh, okay.
and kill you to start with, and then finish breaking the rest of your limbs after you're basically dead. But if your crime was really egregious, like you killed several people and you raped children, and oh gosh, I'm sorry, it's going to get us banned.
Mm,
And
maybe.
you, well, you can cut that part out.
Yeah, we'll cut.
And you committed, yeah, you committed SA on, children and that sort of thing, then you might actually, they would start from the outside by breaking your limbs
Mm,
and then work their way towards, and they might not even, you might never get the coup de grace, actually. You might only ever get the broken limbs, and then they take your broken limbs and they weave them through the spokes of that wheel, and then they leave you to die,
ah.
however long that takes. And then they leave you until you're, and in some cases, the quote I found, you leave the corpse there until it falls off from its own weight.
Mm,
Because this brings us back to the idea of punishment being visible as a deterrent.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, honestly, as Henry's walking around, he should, when he comes in, and they'd be like either posted in the main square or maybe at the edge of the city, so at the gates. So he should actually be seeing at least one of these at some point.
Yeah. At some point, hopefully. Well, hopefully not, perhaps, depending on the situation. All right. A few more questions coming in with that one. The spin needs to be spread apart. Let me know if. Oh, 1 second. Yeah, yeah. All the questions in there, absolutely not annoying, lads. It's all good for my algorithm, so keep chucking them in there. So no,
Yeah.
none of your questions are annoying. Just keep asking away.
Nope. None
Um,
are annoying.
let
Or
me know.
engagement. Good.
Yeah, engagement is good. Are we going through all the punishments for heretics? Probably not all
God.
the punishments for heretics. Just the ones that we kind of, when we were putting this together, because we had about a week to put this together with all the other jobs that we have to do as well for our channels to keep them going. So we kind of like, when we were putting these slides together and stuff, we were trying to aim it around Bohemia, especially as Rachel was just saying there, the punishments for deterrence is mostly what we're covering right now. Um, did any of these had a bit of foot fetish? No. Well, maybe it depends on them. What would the grace after they ran you through it? Yeah. I think if you got the old headshot at the start, it would kind of be a relief. We'll just move on to the next PowerPoint now. Oh yes, this is one of your one, Rachel. Could you? What's going on here? Who's these five kings and so forth?
So yeah, these hanging. So this is an old story.
Mm,
But what I specifically chose this was to show the method of hanging. So modern people, when they imagine hanging, and they imagine a trapdoor, you fall through the trapdoor and your neck snaps and it's all over.
mm,
But that isn't how medieval hanging worked at all. Um, you would be strung up to something like a tree or or a gallows,
mm,
and the stool would be kicked out from under you. You wouldn't fall with any kind of force. You just hang there and strangle to death.
mm.
So hanging until, that's why it's called hanging until dead,
Yeah,
because um, because that could actually take a while. It actually takes longer than people really want to think about to be strangled to death.
yeah. It's
So,
uh,
and in general, they would then be left there to hang until their bodies fell down
yeah.
from
It's
their own weight.
very, very, very hardcore because you're talking about a good 10 minutes of people doing the most gruesome movements and even their bowels emptying out while they're being strung up like that. At least when we go into more of the modern periods where there's just, as you were saying there, the ground itself kind of lets go on them, because we have different constructions and stuff. There's a sudden snap
Right.
to the neck, but that's not what's going on in the medieval period. You have a good solid 10,
Mhm.
20 minutes of the person, strangling to death, and it's
Yeah.
really a gruesome sight if you've ever seen it with your own eyes. It was even watching the movie last night of Christopher Columbus. I think it was The Conquest of Paradise, the movie that came out in 1992, and it
Oh
has a
God, yeah.
yeah, it has a woman at the start being strangled to death, and that's only for a minute or two, and yet it gives the effect of that poor woman swallowing her own tongue and biting down on it, highlighting the fact of how gruesome it was back in the period.
And
Strangulation was.
it's really bad. It's obviously the victim is suffering, but we never ever really give a moment to think about the executioners who who have to carry out these sentences, right? These aren't being carried out by machines. These are actual humans, and the psychology behind someone who has to do this. I mean, it's I we yes, maybe they were dehumanized, maybe they had lost their sense of empathy, maybe they othered their victims so that they could carry out their task, but I can't imagine it didn't leave a mark on their psyches
Yeah,
to have to do this sort of thing.
I think I've gone through, I either read it myself or I was going through the literature, something on those lines anyway, of the executioner for Henry VIII and how he was a alcoholic. And people would purposely also buy him drink as well, because there were people, especially within the noble class, that thought it was funny to punish people further. So they would actually bring the executioner out a night before and get him drunk. So that way, when he was committing the execution, he would do it bluntly, continuously missing the poor victim. And
Right,
so Henry VIII's executioner was a drunk. They used to have to, for Anne Boleyn, they actually had to bring a professional over, a professional swordsman over to execute Anne Boleyn, because perhaps Henry VIII, with a little bit of empathy left, felt it for Anne Boleyn and didn't want his own professional executioner to blunt the job like he usually did, because he was famous for it, because he was
right.
such an alcoholic. So yeah, from the anytime I come across professional executioners from local towns and stuff, they are screaming alcoholics from my interpretation, and it definitely leaves a mark. It's perhaps it's the high level professional ones that were previously swordsmen and stuff that do that, and we'll go through. I think it's the next slide, perhaps. Oh yeah, we've got this one. Um, there we go, where we've got more of a professional swordsman here who can do the
Right.
quick snap, and you can see the difference when you've got the executioner with the axe who does a blunt job, that's most likely an alcoholic perhaps, or you've got more of the professional one here that lacks
Swordsman. Yeah.
empathy. Yeah, these people lack full on empathy. It's like it just doesn't exist for a lot of these professional ones who don't drink and are very strict in their routine. But these people are sought after throughout Europe. You know, they're paid a handsome price to show up to their court to do a very quick job.
You
Um,
you would have to pay me a lot, God knows I would. I
yeah,
mean, there are some people who deserve it, no doubt, but there's also a lot of people who have, yeah, so I commented recently on someone's Facebook post that just does not equal legal. Those words are actually not synonymous.
mm,
Anyway, there's a question. Is that a child climbing the ladder or is it a stylistic choice? So that is a stylistic choice. So this is actually hanging of the five kings is from the Old Testament,
mm,
from the book of Joshua.
yeah,
So that's not a child. That's just a stylistic choice. God knows why, because obviously they can draw people at full size, but that is Joshua ordered a soldier to take them down, so not a child.
oh, that's good. Because it's gruesome
Yeah.
the way it is. And anytime I do see children running around, I think one of the images later on, or I don't actually have of a sentence of someone being hung, drawn, and quartered, is children running around in the background, and like Jesus, imagine witnessing someone being hung, drawn, and quartered, especially at the young age of 4. Like Jesus, it's something
Yeah,
else
there's so
there.
there's definitely a dehumanization
Mm,
effect of all of this. You just sorry, you really do just get inured to the violence after a while.
mm,
In the case of the Pazzi conspiracy in Florence, which is one of Leonardo da Vinci's earliest extant sketches is of one of the Pazzi conspirators hanging from the Palazzo Vecchio.
mm,
The children actually kept digging up the head Pazzi's body and doing horrible things with it. And to the point where eventually, like, they kept trying to get the body away from them because that even the Florentine leaders thought, okay, this is enough. This is really gross. What are you children doing with this
mm.
corpse? So that kind of highlights the level of dehumanization that medieval children actually probably experienced because of witnessing all of these things at
Yeah,
a young age.
can imagine. That's absolutely horrific. Just
Yeah.
moving on before we get too dark. What's going on with this one here, Rachel? Because when I was putting it together, I was like, okay, so there's a fight in the middle. We've got a bunch of lawyers on the other side, I assume, and then what's going on here, Rachel?
Yeah, so there's a brawl. There's a brawl happening here, and so this actually depicts a court.
Oh, okay.
So what you see here, if you look on left and right, so you've got crimes being committed kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
You've got a fight, so there's, people are dying. You've got theft happening up in the upper central corridor of this composite picture. And then on the left, you actually see a court in session.
Mm,
So the physical act of justice being rendered is actually depicted here and also on the right. So there's like two different kinds of courts.
mm,
You've got a court where you have a full complement of judges, and then you've also have a jury of peers, and then you've got the box at the center is where you have the accused, and the prosecutor, and then up there on the right is the right upper right is a lord rendering justice,
mm,
more directly. So you've got this different styles of rendering justice. You have a full court panel of judges and a jury, or you've got the local lord just sort of passing judgment.
That's absolutely fascinating. All right, and it goes back to the earlier questions that we wanted to cover how this was going on in Europe and stuff. So I hope that covers a lot of questions we got earlier on. Moving on slightly, yeah, this was I find this very interesting as well. I assume this is much more of a professional beheading rather than a blunt one that we would have seen with an axe, where the poor victim, may have been hacked to death at times. And I'm fully aware that there are axes that can do a good job at decapitating, but most of the times I myself have
Yeah.
looked at axe executions. Most of the time, the axe has been very blunt, and also on
Yeah.
top of that, the poor executioner may have been brought out the night before, to go drinking and stuff, to deal out an even worse punishment to the poor victim. However, anytime I've seen sword depictions, it's always been a very good technique, and you can see it in his foot movement. If you can see the back leg there slightly raised and the front one is lowered, showing that the person actually knows what he's doing with the sword, so you can get that nice
Right.
slash to the victim. So the death is very quick, out like a light, from what I've heard. Um,
But what's interesting about that you say that is that indicates that this artist
yeah,
probably therefore actually witnessed a sword execution.
yeah. And it was the same one. There's another one. I don't know if you put it up or if I put it up, but there's another one, and it's the exact same thing again, where you've got somebody in what they call in the martial art world the horse riding stance. But it's slightly, his foot movement is slightly actually in the middle of moving. So once again, it shows that the artist actually knows a bit of a martial art, that they've, as you were saying there, probably witnessed it, and probably even knows how the movement of the body actually goes when committing one of these executions, especially at the high
Right.
level that these professionals are at. So
Yeah.
what we're looking at here, in my opinion, and maybe you'll correct me on this, Rachel, is that this is actually a professional beheading and not one of these, local executioner.
Yeah, for certain. And I wish I don't remember which, because this is from the Morgan Bible. So obviously it's an Old Testament scene. And I don't remember which of the Old Testament scenes it is, because that always informs the art itself. But yeah, this is definitely, yeah, swordsmen were expensive. Uh
Willy nilly chuck
you
them
didn't
in
just
there.
pull out a sword and cut off someone's head. Swordsmen were expensive.
Mm.
So for certain.
Oh, brilliant. Would you like to elaborate on this more, or will I just move on to the next slide there, Rachel?
No, I think we can go on. I don't know if we actually found a picture of an axeman. But
I
yeah,
think
the
one of the
point
ones
is
that you
that
may have up, I think we have later
this
on.
this is probably honestly the most merciful form of execution that they had in the Middle Ages.
Yeah,
Um, because all the other forms are way more terrible.
yeah. I think even Anne Boleyn, I know people go on, talk about how horrible
Mm.
Henry VIII was, especially when he was doing anything else but rocking up for Anne Boleyn's own execution. But he spent a lot of money having a specialist brought over to England to have
A French
poor
swordsman.
yeah,
Yeah.
to have poor Henry, or was it poor Anne Boleyn executed, and even wait, like he didn't get, willy nilly to come out drunk and chop her head off. No, she was done outright. So if
Yeah.
he did have, and there was a lot of politics happening in the background as well. So perhaps he did have a lot of emotion for Anne Boleyn and had to, quickly move on with his life because of politics and stuff. So yeah, very interesting. The difference between a swords executioner and a blunt axe executioner. Just moving on to this one because I found this one very, very
Yes.
interesting. The drowning in
Yes.
Switzerland.
Drowning. Yeah. Like I said, way worse ways to die than to just have your head cut cleanly off by a swordsman. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in Bohemia, drowning was actually a potential form of execution for fornication.
Fornication. Oh no.
Yeah, was one of the options, which, yeah, drowning. If you've got a powerful river nearby, drowning is probably one of the forms of execution your town is going to have. Crime and punishment are very local
Mm,
in the medieval period, right? Because of, well, lines of communication and the speed of travel. So your form of punishment is going to reflect your local conditions, just like your clothing sort of will.
yeah.
So and God knows in Switzerland, especially if this is Geneva, they've got the Danube,
Yeah.
uh, or they've got the Rhine. So, they've got pretty powerful rivers that they can use to take care of their people problem.
Mm.
But even still, drowning is, yeah,
Yeah,
would be my choice.
we could actually probably see this because this is 15th century as well, Switzerland, and on top of that, which is not too far away from Bohemia, and on the top of that as well, fornication is definitely one of the crimes that you could commit in the New Kingdom come to, from what I've seen. So we could actually probably see something like this to happen to poor Henry. Hopefully not, because that would be pretty dark for the player to witness. Um, yeah, just moving on slightly here, where we have the torture and execution of women. Um, yeah, would you like to elaborate on this one, Rachel?
Right. So we've got all kinds of fantastic forms of punishment here. There's a pillory in the center.
Mm,
So there's a question about the pillory, and the pillory was used for minor crimes, and this definitely falls under the heading of Roman law visual punishment as a deterrent.
mm,
And if you were caught, depending on where you were, if you were caught, yeah, fornicating, say, a priest and a woman,
mm.
then you could be locked up in a pillory like this, and then they would throw all kinds of unpleasant things at you, including feces. By the way,
Oh,
they're not going to throw vegetables at you. No one is going to do that. No one is going to waste precious food in the Middle Ages because food wasn't allowed to rot.
so
So
no tomatoes, no?
no, 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 no rotten food. They would throw feces at you,
Mm,
or mud, or rocks. Even it's even not necessarily about humiliation. Like, you could have rocks thrown at you in the pillory, so
okay.
you're not necessarily going to come away uninjured. And this was sometimes in some places, if you were caught fornicating or adultery, sometimes in different places the pillory could be used. But in Bohemia, they didn't seem to use the pillory. Like, I have this register of punishments from the Black Book of Lipnic, and they're pretty severe when it comes to sexual acts, transgressive sexual acts.
Mm.
Oh gosh, that's going to get you banned. I'm sorry.
Oh well,
I'm
we'll just push
not
ahead.
used to not using real words.
I know, right? What
Um,
was it? The PC culture of YouTube's gone wild with its wokenism.
but what's interesting is that there seems to be in Bohemia, there is a definite trend that, in the medieval period, uh, they're not as concerned with transgressive sexual acts, but as the Reformation wears on, they
Mm,
get much more tight, much more restrictive and severe about it.
yeah. Okay.
So yeah, in the Middle Ages, for the most part, um, you know, fornication was mostly punished by the pillory.
Mm,
Now, why those women are there, I'm not certain specifically, but yeah, we've got the torture of witches. But what's interesting about this, you'll notice it's not just women.
Mm,
If you look to the right, there is definitely a man who is being tortured
yeah.
there. So even though it was usually women who were mostly accused of witchcraft, men were as well.
Yeah.
And of course,
Because I had
go
that all
on.
right. Somebody highlighting this week that when I did my short on the execution of women, because it's kind of a topic that came up this week as well. Somebody did highlight that the majority of men during the medieval period were done for, heresy and being a heretic and stuff, which is a very good point. Um, Most of the witch executions actually happen in the early modern period. We have one reference in Scotland where 8,500 women in Scotland were accused of witchcraft and were tortured for being alleged witch. And out of that, 2,500 women were burned in Edinburgh for being a witch, which is really, if you've seen like even 100 people being executed, is wild. But what was it, 2,500 during the 16th century? Those numbers are so large going into the early modern period. So it's definitely a period
Yeah,
after the medieval. Like everyone thinks the majority of witch executions happened in the late medieval period, and it's not true. Actually, it's the
you
early
don't.
modern that sees the majority of
Yeah.
women being executed for allegedly being a witch, which is so funny because we're supposed to be going into the age of enlightenment.
Enlightenment. Yeah. It's the Reformation really buggers women so badly in so many ways because it's such a misogynist movement for the
Mm,
most part. And so, you end up with all of these, the fear and anxiety surrounding witchcraft that arises in the 16th century and into the
mm,
17th century is alarming. But for the most part, wise women, as they were called, often referred to in various languages in Europe, were left alone. They were healers, they were herbalists. They kind of lived off by themselves, sometimes in a cottage in the woods, and they were left alone because they weren't a threat.
mm,
For the most part, any most of the witch burnings of the Middle Ages are political, right? The Templars were accused of witchcraft
mm.
and burnt. The
They were.
Cathars were burnt as heretics, and part of that was they were accused also of committing witchcraft, even though, of course, they weren't. So it's very rare that someone is actually happens,
Mm,
but not often. And it's mostly the later, as you're getting towards the Reformation, end of the 15th century, you start seeing an uptick, and that's also when the Hammer of Witches is published
ah,
in the
lovely.
1480s,
Mm,
right, by the Pope. So, um, yeah, but you're right. There's not witchcraft, which it's not. The Middle Ages were not a big period for witch persecutions. It was only used as an excuse to get to someone whom otherwise you couldn't get,
mm.
right?
Yeah,
So yeah.
we'll
Oh,
elaborate on this a wee bit more, but now that we've actually fully offended both the radical incels on the right and the radical liberals on the left with wokeism, we'll quickly move on before we offend any more else. Yeah,
man,
this one looks
we're trying to
completely
generate
radical.
engagement in the comments. What else can we do?
Aye, that's it. So anyway, moving quickly on before we offend anyone else. Martyrdom with the poor dragging with the animal. That's very, very radical. What's going on here, Rachel?
Yeah, so this is a martyrdom scene of an early one of the early martyrs from the third century.
Mm,
So there's a question of whether this punishment was actually used, but I did find one account where you're actually tied to an animal, and I'm confident I could find more if I dug more. You're actually tied to an animal and then dragged through the streets. And then as you're dragged, people can flog you and beat you, and eventually you just die.
yeah.
And this is again for really, really top level crimes. This is not petty theft. This is treason level sort of punishment.
Yeah, yeah.
And in this case, and I think in this particular, in the original martyrdom tale, I think he's even dragged upstairs, by a cow. So yeah,
That'd
it's
be
it's
pretty tough
it's
stairs, to be honest with you.
yeah. I mean, there's stone. I mean, like stone, not, I don't mean like the wooden ones that you see in a tower. I mean like the kind
Ah,
you see in the public out
Mm.
out in the streets where you have stairs going from one level of the city to another or something like
Ah,
that.
yeah, that makes much more sense. It would have to be to
Yeah,
hold
stone
all the
stairs.
weight of the
Yeah, no, no,
wooden
no. Yeah,
stairs.
no, no, no cows going up wooden stairs. You're right. That would be a recipe for silliness, which would belay the point of the punishment.
Yeah. It amazes me how history offends people. There's nothing worse. Yeah, especially when politics are very, very sensitive right now. We won't delve too much into it right now, and we'll keep mostly to the crimes and punishments because, God, myself and Rachel could bitch about the modern political side all day, and we'll probably later on. Back to more professional beheadings. This was actually something you posted onto your side of the slides. And I noticed straight away when you sent it over to me, it was exactly what you were saying about the horse riding stance. This professional executioner is actually in a horse riding stance here as he's going in to actually decapitate this poor man. So you know all of these decapitations were, and once again, this guy would have been paid a lot of money
Yeah.
to be brought over to commit his execution. Can you fully expand on this one, Rachel?
Yeah, so this is an actual chronicle. So Froissart was he lived in the 14th and into the early 15th century, and he was a chronicler. Like
Mm,
that's what he did. He chronicled the history of France and England in this time. So a lot of what we know, including Ireland, actually,
yeah.
a lot of what we know about French and English history from this period, from the sort of Hundred Years' War period, is from Jean Froissart's chronicles.
Mm,
And there are many editions of his work. So, the thing that is being depicted is probably happened 100 years before the manuscript, often
ah,
because it might be a later edition. But that being said, this is not a biblical scene. This is an actual execution series of executions that actually happened. And so this is depicted pretty realistically for a 15th century execution. You can see the city in the background. And this is the city of Bordeaux, as it would have looked in the 15th century when this artist was. So the 1470s is when this was actually created, this work. So you can actually see the real city, how a medieval city would have looked in France. Really, quite beautiful actually.
wow.
And then in the public square, of course, you've got a scaffold set up. Scaffold is necessary so that everyone can see what's happening.
Mm,
Remember, this is the idea of deterrence through public display of the punishment. And yeah, then they are beheaded and their bodies are just kind of cast down into the crowd. And
yeah.
unfortunately, their heads will probably be put on pikes and placed on the city walls for everyone to see and just kind of left there until they, disintegrate. And that also happened to the Duke of York,
Mm,
also during the War of the Roses. Um, and their bodies will be, if they're lucky, their bodies will be interred. It depends kind of on how merciful the king is feeling in this particular case.
yeah.
Um,
Very, very touchy.
yeah.
And it's very interesting that in the comment section we have this beautiful quote. If we do not teach history, it will repeat itself. Thank you for this lesson. You're more than welcome. And it's very, very true. If we don't go into the nitty gritty of this stuff and show people, hey, look, this is why life wasn't so great back in the day, it will repeat itself because somebody will have it in their head that, hey, wait, why don't we deter people by doing this kind of stuff? And in fact, there's especially when it comes down to my side of the slides and stuff, you'll see why they had to quickly get rid of all these public shows, if you could call them that, because a lot of the times they would have had the opposite effect on local people, as you were saying there, especially with the children, be
Right.
desensitized to what was going on around them. How often was the sword used for executions opposed to the axe? Um, from my reading, and Rachel will probably correct me on this one, not that much, because the swordsman, these guys were professionals. As you can see here, this executioner is wearing high standard clothing, from my interpretation. Rachel will probably correct me on this one. So
Yeah, yes.
this straight away, it says to me, looking at this photo alone, that this executioner is worth a lot of money. You can also see in his stance that this guy is fully trained up in martial arts. He's a professional swordsman that most likely seen the
Yeah.
battlefield as well. So he truly knows what he's doing and probably teaches other men how to use a sword as well. So he probably teaches classes in swordsmanship. And so he's also, if we look back to Anne Boleyn, who had a swordsman from France brought over, there was no professional swordsman that could commit such a execution in England. Henry VIII actually had to
Yeah.
bring somebody over from France to do it, and this guy, these executioners, because they're so professional, probably had no form of empathy inside their stomach. It probably didn't dissect into their brain. These guys were just, like machines. They rocked up and
Yeah.
they did a very, very, very good professional job, to be honest with you. It's not like they're like completely insane or off doing crazy stuff at nighttime and stuff. These guys lived proper organized lives in society. They just completely lacked empathy, but we're very good at to do such a high standard job, you'd have to lack empathy. um
Yeah, you'd really have to other your targets, right?
yeah,
There's a psychological trick for that, right?
yeah.
This person is other as in they're a criminal, so they're not really human.
Mm,
They're from a different place, so they're not really human. There's tricks, psychological tricks for that, and these professional swordsmen had to have had them.
yeah, of
And
course.
I definitely agree with you that it's not common because
Yeah,
these are this you like most likely these men. And here's the other thing people don't realize, you actually have to pay your executioner.
yeah.
You the person, not the city, you the person being executed had to pay your executioner. And if you didn't have the money, then they would get it out of your property somehow. But these men have paid for this swordsman.
Mm.
Guarantee it.
Yeah, I remember that scene in The Tudors where Anne Boleyn had to pay her swordsman a lot of money. So they were, even in
Yeah.
the TV show The Tudors, it does highlight the fact that this guy was worth his buck and was very, very good at his job as well. Poor Anne Boleyn was just out like a light. She was decapitated so quickly, in fact, her eyes were still moving in her head. Her brain
Yeah.
hadn't realized what happened yet. And so for a few seconds her head would have been on the ground, and she may have been conscious to what was going on around her before complete dimness hit her. So very, very, very strange situation indeed. One person puts in that the fact that they're late for the video, and has Charles the First been discussed yet? I'm not quite sure if you're talking about Charles the First of France, perhaps, or Charles of England.
I
But no,
think
we
she means
haven't.
England.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I haven't discussed him anyway yet. I'm not sure if Rachel will bring Charles the First up in discussion, but
No, that's when things get ugly and messy in the Reformation. I don't like that period of history very much. I mean, I know
yeah,
a lot about it, but it's very sad and
yeah,
depressing and dark.
yeah, especially
No,
for
we're
Ireland.
sticking to the 15th century today for the most part.
Mm. Especially around the new video game, which is really good for our algorithm right now, which is the Kingdom Come Deliverance. So we're kind of going between Bohemia and my own channel, Irish Medieval History. So we'll be going between Ireland and Bohemia for the most part. Just moving on slight. Oh yeah, we decided to go full heavy metal here. Um, what's going on here, Rachel? Why is this guy's
Oh,
sausage, as my wife would call it, lollipop insides hanging out there? Because if you
yeah.
actually look at his stomach, it's actually a lollipop. It's not entrails.
Yeah. Yeah, so the worst crime that you could commit, pretty much short of heresy, was treason.
Mm,
And treason in many parts of Europe, including Bohemia, came with drawing and hanging.
mm,
And drawing doesn't mean what people think it does. Drawing means that you cut a person open from throat to crotch, basically, and you pull out their various organs, including their intestines. You draw out their organs, and you do this while they're still alive. And In this case, they are actually sometimes, as they depict here, they would do it on a high ladder like this, way above a fire, and the organs would just get thrown into the fire.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you were alive for this, and it's amazing how long the body can tolerate this until eventually it shuts down. It goes on for longer than you think it should. Stupid, resilient humans. Um, and this was the worst, in my opinion, the worst punishment you could have as a person because yeah. So this was the punishment for treason, and it was people, as you can see, the square would have been full of people. William Wallace saw this, got this punishment.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Hugh Despenser did, as you see here, but that was like at the end of the 14th century. So,
Mm.
hmm? Really? Oh, okay. Apparently, I just learned something. Apparently, the medieval belief was that ideas came from your intestines.
Ah.
And so the bad idea you had to commit treason was being purged by ripping out your intestines, apparently.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's
So,
really, really radical. Very hardcore. Especially once again, as I was saying, lucky there's no children in this one, but I did see if you go into Wikipedia and put in to be hung, drawn, and quartered, it has a depiction from the 17th century, and it has children running around witnessing this. Just absolute butchery. Absolutely disgusting and disturbing. I remember one as well from the 18th century after the siege of Limerick with what was it, the Williamite and Jacobite Wars. The mayor of Limerick is hung, drawn, and quartered as part of the negotiations, and yeah, very, very hardcore stuff because it literally is. It's pure butchery. Anyway, lighting up and moving on slightly. Wedding manuscript. I do know that there is a wedding happening in Bohemia during the game. But we haven't got quite there yet.
so,
What's.
so, so this is actually a punishment.
Oh, really? Getting married?
Ye- Yes. So, okay. Again, I'm going to try to not trigger the community standards here. Um, so what marriage could be a punishment for two different crimes. One was fornication, especially in Bohemia in this era.
Mm,
It's actually in the Black Book of Litnitz that if you were caught fornicating unmarried, the punishment, if you didn't want other worse punishments, would be matrimony,
okay.
that you would have to marry your co-fornicator.
Mm,
But, and again, trigger warning on SA, as I'm going to try to call it here. If if one of the punishments for an assailant in the case of SA was marriage, if the victim agreed to it, only if the victim agreed to it.
okay. Well,
So,
I could see that being a possibility because of the womanhood being so important. Finding a
yeah,
husband afterwards could be quite difficult, or if she became pregnant, the fact that he would then have to look after her and stuff. So yeah,
yeah,
not really the greatest, but given the period and stuff, I could understand why the
yeah.
victim
It's
would look for some, that form of compensation, I suppose, in a way.
yeah, single motherhood in 15th century Bohemia is absolutely not anything anyone wants.
Yeah, you you
Um,
you actually see the
yeah,
same laws popping up in Ireland as well, where the victim might look for a form of compensation by going into marriage with the attacker, which seems so strange in this period. But yeah, if you're looking at it from that context of the period, you can see why that person would say, "Hey, look, now you have to look after me and our child." So yeah, yeah, I could see why that would be the case.
and that's
Um,
that's that's in fact also why in this image these don't look like happy people.
mm,
Um, so yeah, that's why we have this image that marriage was in fact also a form of punishment for two different sexual crimes.
uh, Okay,
Yeah.
interesting stuff for the period. Just popping back over to this photo for a question. Was this before the four humors concept? What?
Oh, no, absolutely. Four humors, 100% in play.
Ah, right, right, right. That makes
Or
perfect sense now.
Yeah. The four humors are an ancient concept across Eurasia, by the way.
Mm,
Galen, ancient Roman medicine was based on the four humors. Ancient Greek medicine was based on the four humors.
mm,
And in China and Korea, also humoral medicine in going from ancient pre-Christian times all the way through, up in Europe, pretty much, I think it's not until the 18th century that they really start disposing of humoral medicine.
mm.
And in Korea, there's actually still, you can go to Oriental medicine clinics where they still practice humoral medicine. So,
Yeah. Um, sorry if I'm going to butcher your name. When it comes down to languages and stuff, Rachel is so good. Me, on the other hand, complete opposite. I butcher languages outside of Ireland and England. Vera was saying has been posting in some amazing sources and references, guys. So definitely pay attention to her comments in the comment section there. What else do we have here? Oh, interesting. There's a very good. Oh yeah, and that's the books that she's been posting in. So definitely pay attention to that one. Susan has been posting into the comment section. Could the victim choose giving up the baby and becoming a nun in 15th century Bohemia? Not quite sure about that one.
Yeah. So, we have this modern idea that anyone can just go and join a nunnery, but really you had to have money to join a nunnery
Mm,
as a nun because you actually had to come with a dowry by this period, by the 15th century. First millennium is different. Whole different world in the first millennium. In the first millennium, women have a lot more value in Europe. But by this time, there is women have it's completely the opposite. So you actually joining a convent, joining a nunnery in this period is like getting married to Jesus. You literally have a dowry. And so if you're a poor woman, uh, if you're a kind of a peasant, not a not well-heeled peasant or a lower class, and you don't have the money to actually join a nunnery, that's probably not actually going to be an option.
mm.
So yeah, that's why probably marrying your assailant was the more likely choice
Yeah.
because
Uh,
yeah,
what was it?
sadly.
Just post in there. Similar practice occurred in Central Asia surrounding the bride stealing. Yeah, it's also very common in Ireland as well, where you would have had this going on, and also to do with bride stealing as well. And it really is. I know it doesn't, for some people listening to us now, I know it makes absolutely no sense for the victim to marry the attacker. But this was a period where it's like, hey, look, you've just ruined my womanhood. Now you'll have to look after me and look after our child and stuff. So I know it can be quite difficult to look at it from that kind of perspective. But
Right.
yeah, and it is strange, but it is a part of the period and stuff that the victim, sorry, the attacker would have to pay for his deeds by, having to look after her true compensation for the rest of his life. So I don't know. It depends on your interpretation if that was a punishment or not, and the
Right.
what happened. Right, there's misconception. I was shocked to learn a woman of wealth being given over. Yeah, would a woman of wealth being given over?
Given over, no, she would have chosen it 100%.
Yeah.
So we've in the modern world we have this romantic idea about love and marriage and why would you want to go lock yourself away from the company of and from all the things that come with romance.
Mm,
But that's not the medieval world and that's not the medieval reality. So when women died from childbirth
mm,
way, way, way more often
yeah.
than we do now. And also entering a nunnery was a way to have power as a woman
Mm,
because there was no man telling you what to do. You could rise through the ranks and become an abbess and actually have real power. And you're in this community where you can actually have a pretty pleasant life and not have to worry about childbirth killing you early. Nuns live to be very old
yeah.
because they weren't dying in childbed. So it was actually a lot of women wanted to become nuns. It was their choice to become a nun,
Yeah.
to enter a convent and enjoy that much more peaceful, learned life. I mean, you were educated, you got to read and write, you got to create. It was a really good life actually. We have this modern aberrance of an ascetic lifestyle, but the benefits for a medieval woman of becoming a nun were absolutely supreme. And the reason, so it's a question about the dowry to become a nun. Yes. The reason that you had to have a dowry, which means a trousseau, it means materials and money, so that you didn't become a financial burden, an economic burden to the convent. You actually entered the convent contributing goods to the financial welfare of the convent, and that you weren't just coming to drain them of resources,
Mm, mm, mm.
right? So that's the idea. And I know people try to look at monastic, modern view again, they try to look at monastic communities as a corrupt and money-making centers. but like any institution, you still need resources to operate,
Yeah.
right?
That's the thing.
Um,
It is very difficult when we because I was just going to move on to that. That Claire, Dr. Claire in University College of Cork, she right now, back in 2015, I say she right now, I actually haven't been in there since 2015. She was highlighting that she actually done a lot of research for nuns in Ireland, and there were women who had made a name for themselves in the church in Ireland for accountancy. A lot of women, while the men were, especially in the Franciscans and in Dominicans and stuff, while they were doing their praying and all this stuff, it was the nuns that were doing the accountancy side of it, and they were making names
yeah,
amongst themselves because some of them were well sought after because of how good they were in accountancy. And we'll cover a little bit more of how women in Ireland in particular were exceptionally good at finance and economics. Um, but yeah, women were, when it came down to and I know once again we're looking at it from a very modern perspective at times, that the church are actually always beating down women and stuff, but that wasn't always the case when it came down to the medieval period. That we, even Claire,
yeah,
who is she's very radically into her feminism. I've spoken to her a good few times, and when it comes down to medieval history, her modern hat goes off and she puts on her medieval hat, and suddenly
right.
you would think she was very radical Christian by the way she spoke the moment that medieval hat comes on. And that's kind of what we have to do when we're looking at this kind of stuff, is not
Yep.
kind of look at it from a modern perspective, but make sure we're looking at it from a medieval perspective. So I know this particular slide is quite complicated to digest when it comes down to women's rights and why women are doing the kind of things that they're doing. But yeah, we definitely need to look at it from a modern, medieval perspective rather than a modern one.
Exactly. Yep. And it's, there was a good comment here about from Vera. Back then, this was the center of their lives. The church ran in their thoughts, talking about the spiritual and religious aspects. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's also something we, as modern people, probably many of us have an issue understanding internally. Maybe intellectually, we can understand people having this religious or this faith. But really and truly, people in the Middle Ages, for the most part, absolutely had a deep faith.
Mm,
Now, they may have disagreed with the way the church, the institution, was organizing things, and God knows in the early 15th century that's come around.
yeah.
But that doesn't deny the love of God and Jesus and the saints and the belief in the life to come
Mm,
and the worthiness of devoting yourself to prayer. Right? We don't necessarily not there aren't as many people now by percentage
mm.
who feel that way, but in the Middle Ages, it was the vast majority for
Yeah.
certain.
And it's definitely going to be a topic we're going to cover this week, is about how people in this period are questioning what the papacy is doing. And I think
Oh,
it's
yes.
yeah, so we will be delving deeper into this this month, definitely for sure.
Yeah.
Moving on slightly, I noticed this really brilliant quote from yourself, Rachel, that you posted up to finish up your part of your slides. Um,
Yeah.
could you delve into what we're looking at here?
Yeah. So this so during the we're getting into the Hussite Wars themselves at
Mm,
this point. And there's the Hussite Wars. It's an incredibly complex topic. I can't give you an entire lesson in it in the time we have today.
mm,
But basically, the Hussites were idealists.
mm,
As many movements start, it's ideological,
yeah.
and the idea is that the church has become corrupt, and they need to live a simpler life. And actually, in part of Hussitism, part of the Jan Hus's teachings are a form of communism. And I don't mean Marxist communism. I mean the literal idea of living communally, of sharing possessions communally, of no one owning anything, of everyone owning everything.
Mm,
Um, and so that kind of ideology, unfortunately, that idealism doesn't really usually gel very well with the realities of the world.
mm,
And so it resulted, they were trying to come up with ways in this movement to enforce order without being overly brutal about it. And so, you know, yeah, this is 1422, right? So this is the Hussite Wars have finally begun, because obviously in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, they haven't actually started yet.
not
Jan
quite
Hus
yet.
is still preaching, but there hasn't actually, a conflict as such has not actually broken out. right? And I'll just go ahead and read this. So uh, so Prague was basically at this point in 1422 has kind of become this Hussite commune
Mm,
kind of thing, and there is yeah. So after the arrival of Duke Sigismund, um, he introduced an order into Prague. His document provided for capital punishment, and it stated, "It is true that all antagonisms," and this is a quote, "springing from the death of and I'm sorry, my Czech, I have not looked up Czech pronunciations. I apologize, everyone. And I'm not certain if that's a Gel, that might be a Gelivsk, that little circumflex over the Z. Anyway, and his followers should cease, but stipulated that whoever did not heed this injunction would lose his life and estate for the benefit of his ducal grace and the commune of Prague." So basically, this is trying to prevent feuding because what you have is someone commits an offense against party A, so party B commits an offense against party A then retaliates against party B, then party B retaliates again,
mm,
and it just keeps going, and that's kind of undermining the whole point of the Hussite movement.
mm,
And so what this whole thing is about is stopping that just right out the gate. Um, and the idea is that not only will you lose your life, but your estate will be sacrificed, will be put help forfeit, which means your family will be homeless.
mm,
So it's more it's really, this is supposed to be a deterrent. This is really supposed to make people sit up and think before they act violently and create chaos, because the idea is that not only are you going to lose your life, but we're going to make your family suffer the worst thing you can suffer and still live, which is complete penury.
yeah.
Um, and so then, the same penalty was applicable for holding secret assemblies. Again, the idea is we're trying to convince people to play together. To prevent quarrels, it was stated that whoever unsheathed their sword would pay with his hand, right? So this is like Old Testament stuff.
Mm,
Whoever injured another would pay with his neck. So they're really, in the Hussite movement, they're really trying to get people to not act the way they have been acting for a long time, basically. Um, they're trying to get them to not be violent, to try to live Jan Hus's teachings.
mm,
And they're trying to enforce that, interestingly, with violence. So that's a bit of a paradox. Yeah. So this is then there's something else about yeah, so they're also trying to enforce a sort of moral, what we consider a moral order, talking about maintaining a prostitute. If you maintain a prostitute, then both of you should be put to death. But and people think that's a sign that medieval people were sexually verklempt, but it's not. You have to look at these sorts of things from a perspective of social order,
yeah.
right? Fornication is not a sin because of the sex. It's a sin because it's sex outside of the social order.
Mm,
And especially if it's people who are married to other people, then that can lead to violence,
yeah.
right? So it's all, it's the medieval laws are not, don't moralize for morality's sake. They moralize for the sake of social order.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a brilliant quote, isn't it, though?
Yeah, it really is. This idea, but for me, what was fascinating about this is, here the Hussites are trying to live, walk the talk,
Mm,
as we say in American English, trying to live by Jan Hus's teachings, and in turn what why they think are the more original teachings of Christ, and to try to enforce that on the violent members of their movement. They've decided they have to use violence
more
to
violence, get more
enforce
violence in there.
nonviolent behavior.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which brings us into, we don't want to spoil anything, but going from 1403 to eventually get it to the Hussite Wars that happen in around, I think it's, you probably correct me on this one, around 1424, I think it's around, up to 1439, when we actually get the bulk of what could be Kingdom Come Deliverance, probably 3. Hopefully that game comes out. Right now we're dealing with the kind of more political side of it, but you can see already the game is pushing towards the Hussite rebellion that will be happening later on. Even the imageries that I've been sending
right.
over to Rachel, that the studio, the Warhorse studio, is giving an old wink that, hey, this is the bigger picture we're going to eventually tell, is the arrival of the Hussite Wars. So I think this quote is absolutely fitting to our discussion today on crimes and punishment, and how the Hussites, they were trying to use this to constantly deter the Hussites from rebelling, and ultimately they did anyway, which kind of shows why it's so important to actually learn from history. um,
Yeah.
that public displays of execution doesn't actually ultimately work. That in fact,
Yeah.
people, as you were pointing out there, children become desensitized to all of this and eventually go on to
Yeah.
commit it themselves. So it really
It,
does
it,
not
turn,
work.
it turns out, in fact, that socioeconomic stability is what prevents crime.
Mm, yeah, yeah, shocking, shocking. Who knew? Who knew? Um,
So we have a couple of questions I missed anyway. Did the nunneries do midwife work too? And if so, when was this taken over for political reason? The nunneries, not necessarily the nunneries, but midwifery was a profession in the Middle Ages.
mm,
And there were midwives who were residents in the nunneries, but that isn't necessarily an inherent function of the nunneries. But yeah, it's not really until the 18th century that men start interfering, male doctors specifically decide that they need to be the ones handling the midwife work.
aye.
So, and then there's a question about, Vera asked something about the Medici, and I'm trying to remember if I talked about the Medici. Mm. Vera, if you could clarify your question about the Medici, I'll get back to that.
Mm,
Susan talks about Hildegard von Bingen was given as a donation to the abbey. Yeah, that's true. She was one of many daughters. And she says, I wonder how rich her parents had to be become a nun. So it depends on the period, right? Hildegard is first millennium, like she's the 1000s. So that's kind of when the monastic movement is still this, still booming actually. And it's a different kind of movement. You don't necessarily need to be rich to join a monastery in the first millennium, but by the 15th century, it's becoming something that you need to have resources in order to join.
definitely. Um, especially
See
since
what kind, yeah, go on.
especially when you don't have to worry about dying of pregnancy anymore, and you can get yourself a nice, comfy job as an accountant. So
Right. Yeah,
some
you could learn
benefits out there.
accountancy. What country did the originate from? Vera asked. I assume she means the game.
Oh, would that be
Kingdom
was
Come
it
Two, maybe?
Bohemia, which is modern day Czech
Yeah.
Republic? So
Yeah.
it originates around there. I think Bohemia itself had only just kind of started to. This is the period where it's starting to branch away from the HRE, the Holy Roman Empire, and it's starting to get its own identity with the Czech language, which was kind of a. You'll definitely correct me on this one, Rachel. Which is, it's a mixture of kind of Slavic, kind of a little bit of a Celtic influence, and good mixture of German, isn't it? The Czech language.
Yeah, so Czech is a Slavic language.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, they certainly have some German loan words, but
Uh,
yeah. So Bohemia starts as first the original Bomi were a Slavic tribe, a migratory tribe, like so many of the peoples in that part of Europe who started off as some kind of migratory horse based people. And eventually they settle down, as all of those peoples eventually do, because eventually you hit a coast and you decide we're just going to stay here.
mm,
And it becomes a duchy, and then it becomes a kingdom. And at first, it is a Czech kingdom; it's a
mm,
Slavic kingdom. But in the 14th century, the last Czech king, has only a daughter, and she marries the Count of Luxembourg, who's
uh,
Germanic. And that's when the kingdom sort of becomes this mix of German and Czech. And so you actually have two different communities. And in the old town, you've got ironically, in the old town part of Prague, you've got the Germans, and in the new town, you've got the Czech speakers.
uh,
Um, and apparently it's called Czechy. The kingdom was called Czechy in the Middle Ages by people speaking Slavic languages. Böhmen, Bohemia, was the Germanic name.
mm.
So different people called it different things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. it's definitely like even enjoying the game now with the all the different cultures in there. Especially myself, like you would think myself being Irish that I would find no connections in the video game Kingdom Come 2, and yet myself and Yuki yesterday found a nice little tribute to the Celtic culture that was there around 300 BC in Bohemia, and
Right.
even the connection with the oak tree and stuff that myself and Yuki believe is a connection to their Celtic culture back, and that whole
Right.
Celtic influence that went from Ireland all the way over to Turkey. So the
Right.
Bohemian and many of those areas were, as you would say now, multicultural. And I know people will look at it from a modern perspective, but for the medieval period, Bohemia was definitely, Prague was definitely an area from a medieval perspective of multiculturalism, and
It was.
it's definitely something we'll delve into again, because this has become a topic that's very hot right now, is multiculturalism and traders from all over the world coming over to Prague to trade at this period. So we will delve way deeper into that topic much later on. Just paying attention to the time now, so I can
Right.
fly over to my presentation. Rachel, thank you so much for that one, especially all the work that you had to do in such a very short time. Um, Rachel had about a
Research
week.
is me.
Yeah, Rachel had about a week to put that presentation together, and on top of that, there was a sudden change because Wednesday then we had a load of people who decided they were just going to pay compensation, and Rachel was there looking through everything, going, "Where's compensation? Where's compensation?" And she was also trying to do her own work as well for both her channel and all of the other projects she's a part of. So it was a lot for Rachel to ask for. So thank you so much for that little presentation there. We'll jump over to my presentation now on crimes and punishment, because a lot of obviously this is happening over on the Irish medieval side. So I decided to put together a little presentation on crimes and punishments in 15th century Ireland, which is really cut into two parts, which is the Gaelic side of Ireland, which I've put here as the majority of Ireland, which is mostly in the northwest side of the country and would be mostly in the countryside. Obviously, as people would know at this stage, in around the 11th century, we had the coming of the 12th century, sorry about that, 1169. You had the coming of the Normans onto the island, which brings
Right.
massive change. But before then, you had the native Irish people who were very much used to cattle compensation. So in Ireland, before the coming of the Normans, we had Tuits in the country, and they were pretty much come together as one group. And if your family, did a crime, it wasn't you as an individual who would pay that compensation. It was the clan itself, and then that would then cause the clan to quickly shut you up anytime you were decided to do something bold again. So this version of cattle compensation worked really, really good in Ireland, because if you went out and you committed a crime, your family would have to then give over their cattle, which, as Rachel will tell you now, like cattle was worth a lot of money back then, especially to a
Yeah.
family. So if you had to hand over your family to pay compensation for something that you did wrong, oh boy, your family is going to punish you very, very fast. So this cattle compensation before the arrival of the Normans onto the island was very effective, and that covers pretty much everything from murder to committing SA to a lot of things. And there was a lot of different individual compensation to be paid, but for the majority, cattle compensation was very popular on the island, and it was very
Mm.
effective because, you know, if mommy gets mad because you went and murdered the neighbor next door, you're gonna suffer. You will suffer, and it's therefore very, very effective on the island. Uh,
So what was was there like, have you found, or are there documents that talk about like one cow for theft, one cow for two cows for property damage, three cows for killing a woman? Is there any kind of
yeah, we do.
fine chart?
Sadly enough, the majority. I actually have the book over here. It is. Oh, let me just grab the book very quickly. Very unprofessional of me, but I'll very, very quickly grab the book. One sec.
Oh, so I'll just get to check the comments. Vera, well, thank you. I'm glad you learned a lot. I I Really
Yeah.
appreciate everyone joining us today for this live stream. We're having a good time talking about violence and of all sorts, whether being rendered by criminals or by the justice system.
Oh, I definitely.
Um,
So the book that you've been looking for, if you want to know exactly the compensation you would have to pay, is a guide to early Irish law. Where in it, it covers a lot of the set prices. So if you like murdered, the neighbor next door, you would have to pay so many cows. Or if you decided to commit SA against someone else, your family would have to pay that. So definitely the book you want to look for
mm,
is A Guide to Early Irish Law by Fergus Kelly. And it's an absolutely
mm,
magnificent book because it covers loads of the laws of the period. Now, sadly, a lot of, as myself and Rachel were talking about later on, a lot of the documentation was burned. So then trying to find out then how these laws were adapted going into the 15th century
mm,
can be quite difficult because especially with the Battle of the Four Courts that happens in
mm.
1921, if you look at the
Yeah.
video to do with that, you can see snow suddenly starting to appear in the sky.
Not snow, is
Yeah,
it?
it's not snow. It's actually 15th century literature burning. And the problem
Right.
is that although we see the renaissance of early Irish law back into the 15th century, the thing is that now these laws have to be adapted, and that's why people refer to it more as Brehon law rather than late medieval law, because what happened is, especially in the Fitzgeralds and Butlers areas, where the Fitzgeralds and Butlers are not used to dealing with Irish law but think it's more effective with their Irish population, is that
Mm,
they bring in these Brehon trained men from Scotland and from the north of Ireland and over from the west of Ireland, and these people bring in these laws, but they have to adapt it then to both English common law and also to Roman canon laws. And so
right.
the 15th century laws are much more different, but because they're localized and also these literature are missing, it can be very difficult to know what exact compensation needs to be paid in the 15th century. So
Right.
it's very much up to debate how this would have been adapted in the 15th century, depending on the situation. So it can be difficult to
Well,
find examples of that.
I can tell you that Irish butter is like the best butter in the world. So if someone tried to take my cow,
Yeah.
they would have a fight on their hands.
Yeah, and you'd be especially upset if you had a son and he decided to make sure that you would have to give up your cattle. That would be quite annoying. Um, do we have any questions popping up there?
Did Gallo Glass wear Lanus?
Yes, Gallo Glass did wear Lena. Both the
Did,
Gallo
yes.
Glass and Kerns, and now also we have nobles that want to recognize themselves as warriors would have worn the Lena into battle as well. So it was very much associated with the warrior class in Ireland. There's this idea that pretty much everyone would have worn the Lena in medieval Ireland, and that's not really the case. The bog bodies that myself and Rachel were looking at, we haven't found any Lenas on any bards or anyone like that. It seems to be mostly focused on the warrior class in Ireland. But Rachel will delve much more deeper into that this week when she releases her video, one video over to my channel and another video onto her channel discussing that. So that's a really, really good question to ask. My voice has gone more lower. Can you hear me now, Susan? Perfectly fine. I'll elaborate
Yeah,
more.
it might have just been when you kind of meandered away to get that book and then came back. So
Oh
I
yeah,
think, I mean,
probably.
yeah.
um, Another massive punishment as well, if you're going around committing crimes, is the loss of status. And the reason why I have Richard II here surrounding his crown is because the Irish were actually in 1399 were fully at war with Richard II. Richard II had invaded Ireland from 1394 up to 1399. And so when Richard II returned to England, because Archmac Kavanagh, who was at war with Richard II, had his English connections because he was married to an English woman, Elizabeth de Ville. When he this would have been very significant for the Irish, that they would have seen this as a good punishment for the king for him to lose his status as King of England, because the Irish would have seen him as pretty much a criminal coming in here to undermine their their society and stuff. And so, if you couldn't, or sometimes, if your, let's say your son commits a crime and stuff, it's your family would have lost status. For example, if they were a king of that local area, they would have been brought down to just being a baron and stuff, because a lot of people would have seen, hey, look, if your child is going around committing all these crimes, maybe you're not really fit ruling this area and stuff. And so loss of status was a part of one of the punishments in Ireland. So once again, it does highlight that Ireland was a very clan-based society, that punishments such as cattle compensation or loss of status would have hit families very, very hard. And even social status, so even if you didn't probably lose your rank going from a king to probably a baron or something, even the social status in your society, that, hey, look, your children are committing these crimes, it looks very frowned upon when you're dealing with a clan society of family on family. So once again, Ireland compared to the rest of Europe is more family orientated rather than you know putting out the individual and punishing them. And we can see now, much later on, when we have the introduction of English laws, how that backfires into a society that's more clan orientated than single orientated.
Right.
The next massive punishment, if you, the individual, continue running around the place, causing damage to your clan and stuff, you could be exiled. If you're that much of a troublemaker to the clan and the clans of that area, they're going to eventually just kick you out. It's like, okay, it's time to leave. And even going as far, if we're talking about like the early medieval, for example, sometimes they would just put the person on a boat and just be like, okay, you're in the hands of God now. Good luck to you. Or as Rachel had pointed out earlier, exile could also be a punishment as well, where you had everyone taking their go, giving you an old slap before you got kicked out. Or we have examples up in Scotland of people having various traps put around your neck, and you're basically given the boot, get out.
Right.
So exile at times could be a physical punishment, or it could be just a case of pack your bags, leave. The biggest danger of all is if you didn't have protection of your clan, and people knew that you were no longer a part of that clan or family, bandits and war bands or various groups of men will take advantage of you, because they know
Yeah.
there's no punishment for them. If you are a part of a clan and you kill that individual, then you would have to pay compensation to that clan. But if you're exiled from a clan, there's no punishment now. If you kill that individual, there's no one to claim compensation against you. So war bands and various other groups have full rights now to do whatever they want with you, and there's no punishment now. So you don't want to be exiled in medieval Ireland. You want to stay in your clan that will protect you, and if any harm is caused to you, they will be there to collect the compensation. So it's very much encouraged to be a very clan on clan family, not to be
Well,
exiled single.
that's true. That's true across all of medieval Europe, even without the clan-based focus. I mean, the reality is that we don't, as modern people who just travel around all the time, oh, so I just have to move from Daegu to Seoul. Okay, no big deal. That's not the way it is in medieval society. You're leaving your entire support network behind.
Mm,
And if you're being driven out of the town with nothing, you literally have no way to set yourself up in a new community.
mm,
You're going to have to walk to that new community. And again, like you said, you're going to have to hope that no one robs you along the
yeah,
way or kills you just because they can.
yeah.
So yeah, it's a terrifying prospect, really, to be exiled like that.
And it makes it even more terrifying because after the period of the Hundred Years' War, suddenly you have Gallowglass and Kearns returning from France and
Mm,
Scotland fighting, who now just they want to continue fighting. They go into little warband groups in the Leinster area, and they just wonder about. They're referred to as Wood Kern. And these wood kerns, as they're referred to in the literature, would just wander around the place looking for problems to cause. And if you're exiled and these word
yeah.
kern see you, good luck to you. You're going to find life is not good. being a single
Yeah.
individual after the period of the Hundred Years' War. Because I think it's the same thing in France and England, where you do
It
have
is the
men.
Armagnacs, yeah, the knights, all those people who were living off of the spoils of war. When the war stopped, then they decide they're going to keep spoiling
Yeah,
the country, the villages and the peasants. It's disastrous for France. It causes a famine because they go around looting all of these farms,
yeah.
right? So yeah, it's the same situation.
So it is 100%, especially after this whole period, after the Hundred Years' War. You don't want to be exiled. You want to stay within a family.
Mm,
Even in medieval Europe, as
no,
Rachel was pointing out there, exile not good.
not good.
um,
It's basically a passive death sentence, is what it's intended to be.
yeah, that's what quickly turn into, especially if you've got exiled around the Leinster area. No family to protect you. Good luck, you know. So it would be for depending on what area you were dumped into, that would be execution like.
Oh,
Um,
hold on a minute, Philip. We have one mic is really loud and one is really quiet.
is it
Which mic is loud and which one is quiet? And is this the first time that's been an issue?
if somebody could point that out, which one is loud and which one would quiet, that
Mhm.
would be amazing. Thank you. How were local Irish laws preserved by the Old English and Usman? They would. I'll move on to that next after I've just covered the more of the Gaelic side of Ireland, more of the countryside of Ireland. I'll move into the punishments for the Anglo-Irish side, which would be the Usman and Old English side of things. I'll cover that in a moment. So if anybody could comment there to see what the story is between one mic being very loud and the other one being very low, that would be
Yeah.
really, really great. Thanks, guys, for that comment. Phillips is quite a while now. Oh, I've been too
Wait, what?
quiet. So we'll have to look up
Quiet.
my sound
Hmm.
on my side.
Yeah,
So
I can hear
Rachel is
you.
perfect.
Yeah, you haven't changed for me at all, so that's fun.
It's funny because the exact same thing happened last week as well, where we had my sound dipping too low. Let me pop over to Discord now.
While you fix that, there's another question that I can answer. Could the Lena be any color or majority yellow because of yellow being a very prestigious color? So please understand that the Lena is not a garment that stays the same over time. It changes and evolves, and the color it can be also changes. So in the first millennium, because I've been doing a lot of research on this, in the first millennium, in the poems and the epics and the chronicles, the Lena, and men and women wear them, by the way. There are women described as wearing them as well. They can be the women are described in Lenas of various colors. The men, usually the heroes of the tales, are nearly always described in either white or bright, shining Lenas. The yellow doesn't really seem to become a thing until the 15th century. And that could possibly tie into the introduction of saffron as a local crop rather than saffron as something that has to be imported from the Mediterranean. So, because it's in the 14th century that the saffron crocus gets introduced into England, putting it much closer to Ireland. Now,
Just
there's also theories that saffron was actually not the dye stuff being used, but it was being called saffron because it was saffron yellow. But I'll get into that in my video. That's a whole debate there. But in other words, no, the Lena doesn't have to be yellow. It's just that yellow was prestigious because of the amount of saffron you would need to dye a massive white shirt yellow would be crazy expensive, like $1,000 for a dye bath in modern terms. So yeah, that's why yellow became popular, not necessarily because yellow was itself a prestigious color. All about conspicuous consumption, my friends.
oh, the joys. Just trying to figure out the
Okay,
sound.
have you changed anything? Should we ask if there's a difference for people?
Not quite yet. I'm
Okay.
just trying to figure out now because we got the PowerPoint back up because I pressed the wrong button perhaps. And can't really see the
So yeah, if
settings
you
to
if you look,
change that one.
well, while you keep futzing, I'll keep talking
Oh yeah,
about the Lena.
go ahead.
Um, so if you look in the first millennium, the Lena is often what, and here's the other problem with assigning words you see in text for clothing items, for instance, with pictures we have, is that you can't necessarily actually connect those two successfully. Um, just because the text describe Elena, for instance, doesn't mean the thing in the picture is necessarily Elena. It could be some other garment, or it could be that the artists aren't really trying to depict real garments at all. So this is an issue in fashion history in general. When you start to get into later periods where you have detailed expense accounts, where they talk about, well, here is, I'll go with Italy just off the top of my head. Here is a Gamora, and the Gamora has 8 L's. And then and it's a woman's, it's worn by a woman, and it's her underlayer. And you can tell that by putting all this information together. And then you can go to the art and say, well, which of these dresses kind of fits the various descriptions we have from these various documentary sources? But that doesn't mean we're necessarily right in assigning the meaning of the term Gamora to the picture or depiction of what this woman is wearing. Same thing with the Lena. It might be that what you see in the depiction of a person is in fact that garment or not. Yeah, I'm probably just, I gave you more non-answers, more questions than answers, but that is the reality of most fashion history. When we have archaeological finds, unfortunately, they don't come with a little label from 1,000 years ago that says, and this is a blah, blah, blah. So, yeah. What was the common color back then? Lots of colors. Medieval people from first millennium all the way through until the mid 15th century when the palette changes. Love bright colors. Love, love, love. The problem is that, of course, all of the bog finds basically turn a kind of uniform brown shade because of the chemicals in the bogs that also preserve the garments. But, we know what kind of dye stuffs they were using. And if you do an analysis of the garments, the extant garments, then you can actually usually figure out what the dye stuffs are chemically. So we know that purples and blues and yellows, because you don't just need saffron, you can get yellow from weld, amongst other things. Reds, and the Irish were known, particularly in the chronicles in the end of the 14th century. And I'm going to get into this in my video that I'm working on, but you get a preview. The end of the 14th century and into the 15th century, the foreigners who are visiting Ireland and seeing the Irish comment specifically about the bright colors that they're wearing. So, all the colors were popular. Some colors in certain sumptuary laws get restricted, or some dye stuffs do. But I haven't actually found in the 15th century, 14th and 15th century, I haven't found sumptuary laws in Ireland about color. But apparently in the first millennium in Brehon law, there were restrictions. Apparently blue was restricted to the upper classes. But I'm going to take this back to words don't necessarily align with what you might imagine that to actually be with your eyes. So just because the original text calls it blue doesn't mean it's what we think of as blue, or it might be a specific blue, or it might actually be the royal purple they're talking about, Tyrian purple, which dies out in 1204, by the way, when the Crusaders sack Constantinople. Okay.
Just
Let me
test
see.
there. Can people hear me now, or is it still very
I,
low?
I can still hear you. Is Philip still low, everyone, relative to me? While we wait for them to answer that, they liked red and crimson, didn't they? Oh, yes. And so there's multiple different dye stuffs you can use to obtain red. In Ireland specifically, they had madder. And the madder was introduced by the Romans, or was not, it came up through the Roman trade connections. And madder it's actually, you would never know it's a dye stuff because the plant is like this green weed, this giant green weed that kind of looks like Queen Anne's lace, but not quite. And the root is actually what gives the red substance. And again, by looking at the root, you would never think this thing will make a red, but it does. A madder red, though, is kind of more of a rust red. It's not like the vibrant crimson. The vibrant crimson comes from kermes, which is where the word crimson comes from. And that is a louse that grows on oak trees in and around the Mediterranean and other parts of the Middle East. And kermes red is also called grain in the various sources, grano or gren, in kind of all the languages. And that was the Mercedes of dye stuffs. No. That was the McLaren of dye stuffs. So that bright red that you see in clothing depicted in the sort of 14th and 15th centuries. If it's a wealthy person they're depicting, that bright red is supposed to be reflecting that rich crimson color. Kermes is unfortunately, as far as I know, kind of extinct. The closest we have now is cochineal, but it's not quite the same.
Mm.
So yeah, red was the color of power in the 14th and 15th century, that bright red, because it was the most expensive dye stuff. Ireland as well. Let me see. Any questions about? I can hear, but the volume is a tad lower than it had been. What?
Yeah, it
Did
seems to
we?
be the output going into the OBS is just, I'm not quite sure what's happened on the OBS side. Not really sure
It
how to
was
bring up the,
fine.
yeah.
Hmm.
What's even stranger is they can hear you perfectly fine, but the
Right. It was
OBS
the
on
other
this
way
side.
last time when you were
Let
the
me
guest. It must
change
be.
mics there, and we'll have another chance there. Let me see. I'll let you
Okay.
finish up the last bit of comments there, and then I'll get back to the
Yeah.
presentation. I'll test the other mic and see if that
Let's
works.
test the mic. Okay.
I'll test the other one.
Would matter be closer to russet? Yes. Yes. For the color of russet. So madder can actually be used to achieve several different colors, and it depends on whether you're dyeing silk or wool. You get different shades, says the person who is absolutely done dyeing in an apartment without proper ventilation. um, yeah, so madder can achieve several shades of red depending on the acidity of your dye bath and if there are other. Couldn't get a hold of Kermes, also in an unventilated apartment, and I will tell you, it makes your apartment stink. It's not a good smell. Uh, what was the Chateau Mouton Rothschild of dyes in this medieval era? Oh, I mean, yeah, that would still be. I mean, anything having to do with the Rothschilds, that's going to be Kermes. Um,
Right, just
wasn't the Arnolfini portrait gown? Oh, go ahead, Philip.
just to test. Can people hear me better or worse now? Just to test my side.
Yeah. Also, Ari asked, what went silent for a little then? Really? How's your mic sensitivity? He asked. Which I don't know if we can in Discord, if you can adjust that.
Not quite
How's it
sure, to be honest
on
with you.
OBS? On OBS, is it when you talk, is the sound bar going up or not? You know, the
Yeah, it
decibel
seems to
levels?
be going up and down. I'm not quite
Right.
sure what's going on with the OBS. It's very cranky and stuff. I have a good tinker around this week. I thought I had it set perfectly on Wednesday, but it seems to be going off doing its own thing right now. How are people hearing me now? Oh, better. Okay, so that's fixed. We'll keep it to this mic. So,
Great.
um,
Okay. Fantastic.
nice.
Okay, so then there was a last question. Wasn't the Arnolfini portrait gown wool on another topic, sort of? The Arnolfini gown wool is doeskin, and yeah, that is the McLaren of wool. It's the wool that's in the Arnolfini wedding portrait, or the Arnolfini portrait. Okay, we're around the same volume now.
Oh,
Sweet.
that's
Okay, so let's
perfect.
remember this. Whatever you're using now is what we're going to use forever.
Well, we literally, the problem is now, I don't know what's going on with the OBS and output, but it seems to get my sound, and then halfway into the interview or whatever is going on, just drop it. So we'll see later on, because we were using this the previous week, and then halfway in it decided to drop the volume down, which ruined the thing. So yeah, she's
So
cranky, all right.
frustrating.
Anyway, we'll jump back to my presentation, shall we?
Yes.
Right, perfect. So yeah, as we were
Brilliant.
saying there, to be exiled was kind of one of the worst things that could happen,
I
especially.
can't see the PowerPoint
Oh, give us one
anymore.
moment. I'll fix that one. Bum, bum, bum. So you can't see the PowerPoint. Give
Oh,
us a second.
okay. I can in the live stream though. Well, it's on the Hanging of the Five Kings on my right.
Yeah.
Why is it?
Give us 1 second there. Maybe if I click it again.
Okay.
Sometimes turning it on and off will work. Can you see it now?
I cannot. What other people, can you see the PowerPoint screen or not?
It's popping up in
Oh,
the.
wait, it's catching up. It's catching up. Yeah.
So I'll just pop over to the next one now, which is beheading. This is pretty. This photo
There we go.
itself that I choose. had chosen is actually in a Welsh text. And we can also see the same kind of similarities between kind of the mythology side with the Green Knight here and kind of Celtic literature and stuff. So I chose this out of all the other photos just to highlight that they're as part of a kind of Celtic culture, if you want to call it, or the similarities between Wales and Ireland, that although they're into compensation and the whole clans and all that side, there's still decapitation that happens both in Ireland and Wales in this period. Now, why would
Right.
they commit a beheading in a country that's into compensation and stuff, where well, it's kind of getting to a thing of, well, if you commit murder against me, my clan will commit murder against you. But in some radical situations, such as if your clan couldn't pay compensation, or like they just don't have the cattle to pay it, or if you're somebody who continues to be a complete nuisance to society even when they've been exiled, then it seems that as a last resort, beheading would be something to actually completely remove you from society. We can see that with the likes of Diarmaid MacMurrough's sons, for examples, where Diarmaid MacMurrough at this point, he is so powerful and he's a threat to the King of Ireland that the only punishment that could happen to his family would, to keep him in line, would be decapitation. So, for example, when he goes over to England to get Norman mercenaries to come back to Ireland to overthrow the King of Ireland, Rory O'Connor, the only punishment that he could dish out to his children to make sure that they won't join his side in exile and then try to overthrow him would be to decapitate his children. So in these cases,
Right.
if you, for example, you've given your child over as a hostage and you plan on rebelling, to make sure that your child won't join you in rebelling against you if they were to exile you, they would decapitate your children. So there is actually these sorts of punishments. For example, if you were to break your homage to a king through fosterage, that the child that's fostered or put into a hostage won't join you in exile, they would decapitate your child. So that would be a punishment for breaking your oath, would be your child, for example, being decapitated, or you yourself being decapitated if you were to raise an army in rebelling against the king. So decapitation would be one of the ways to permanently get rid of you. Also, another punishment for if you were to raise up against your local, especially in the 15th century, against your Taoiseach, the head of the clan, would be castration and blinding. Now, why would they remove your penis or blind you? That would be because in Irish law and Irish customs, they would see the head of the clan as being perfect. The head of the clan had to have the perfect face, and also, he had to have working genitalia so he could continue his dynasty. So if you had your testicles removed, it prevented you from continuing your dynasty. So you were kind of a lousy choice of head of the clan. So if you had any plans to usurp your local Taoiseach, the head of your clan, what he might do is capture you and then remove your genitals or blind you in the face. So it would remove you
Yeah.
as kind of a candidate against the Taoiseach in that area. So another punishment, if you had any plans of usurpation, would be castration and blinding. Any questions on
It's
that?
very they do that in, there's various places, especially in the not so much in the 15th century in
Mm,
Europe, but in like the 12th century, 11th and 12th century. That's still a going concern in a lot of places in Europe to prevent rivalries,
mm,
rivals from taking power. But it's a very interesting idea that instead of just killing that child, and especially they do this to children,
mm.
um, of rivals for the throne. Instead of just killing the child, they think this is the nicer thing to do, to blind
Yeah,
them and castrate them. It's a very strange idea. I mean, I think it would be more merciful just to kill them than and especially in the medieval world, to be crippled in this way is really horrific, actually.
yeah, it is proper hardcore, and it's really super common in Ireland. Especially in the 13th century, there's endless accounts where you have the head or the king of that local area and stuff, and then he would have a bunch of brothers, and to make sure none of his brothers would rise up against him, he'd have them all castrated and blinded. So it is very
Right.
radical, but very, very common. And so it would even be a punishment in the 15th century if you had any plans to rise up against your local Taoiseach, or if your Taoiseach thought you'd be rising up against them. Castration and blinding would be a punishment in that local area. Not so much, because I know in England, to be hung, drawn, and quartered would be more of a punishment for rising up, because Ireland was a very
Right.
clan-based society with tick for tat. So if you kill a member of my clan, I kill a member of your clan, it would actually be easier just to castrate them or blind them, rather than get into an endless blood feud against that clan. So you'd see more castration and blinding rather than to be hung, drawn, and quartered. But it still happened. We still had people that
Right.
were hung, drawn, and quartered in Ireland. Let's see what else pops up in the question area. You better be staying on your land and minding your own business back then. Yeah,
Mm.
you would want to keep your head down and mind your own business, especially in medieval Ireland in the 15th century. Um, what else do we have here? Whoa, so there's laws that said if you are bad, we will punish you, and also laws saying if we are bad, we will punish you. Yeah, I suppose especially if you're running the clan and stuff, it would be a case of, do as you're told, not as you see, or something on those lines.
Yeah.
Do as you say, not
It
as
was
we
you're
do. I
told,
think
not
it.
as we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
There was also a question: did eunuchs have any role in society? Yeah, in Ireland, are eunuchs even? That's not really a institutional thing in Ireland,
I
is
think
it?
it's more of may perhaps in the early medieval period, because I think it's the early medieval period as well in the Byzantine Empire that eunuchs are singers and stuff. I'm not quite sure. I haven't come across anything in the 15th century Ireland, but it's in the continent, perhaps in the Ottoman Empire and that. Rachel will probably know
Yeah,
more than me.
yeah, exactly. The Ottoman Empire certainly has a whole legion of eunuchs,
Mm,
and they're sort of they're in a very good position in the Ottoman Empire. I know a lot of men might not be able to realize that, but looking from the modern perspective, but from the perspective of the time, the eunuchs were some of the most powerful people in the Ottoman Empire.
mm,
China also, of course, China and Korea in this period have eunuch legions who are again the men who serve at the court
mm.
in the women's part of the palace. Um, and But it's not really a European thing, not in the 15th century, not in Byzantium anymore for certain, because Byzantium's about to fall anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, eunuch, there is no this that kind of eunuchry does not exist in medieval Europe anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and the castrati are a later thing.
Yeah.
That's more of an 18th century thing.
Yeah, and I haven't come across any of it in medieval Europe, so it seems to be. And it's the comment section there is imagine being blinded and castrated. I don't want to, especially in 15th century Ireland.
Yeah, really.
I
No, thank
no,
you.
no, no, thank you. Okay, so just as people were saying early on about the Ustamen and the Old English, the Anglo-Irish, and their laws, I'm just going to cover that now very quickly so we can finish up for the day. And once again, because the more of the countryside with the native Gaelic people were mad into compensation, and any time that you didn't go into a situation where you're kind of explaining, why did you do it, would pay a bit of compensation, a bit of negotiation going on between two families and stuff. In the urban areas, it's the same again, where there's a level of compensation. People would rather see compensation happening. Of course, because you're now dealing in the city area, you'd need a bit of coin on you
Right.
to basically pay off any damages that you've done. And you've seen here where the person's paying compensation rather than being killed for what's happening. So even in the urban areas, there's still compensation going on, but in the urban areas, there's more punishments going on. And as I was saying earlier about more
Oh, there it
punishment.
is. The
Yeah, yeah.
stocks.
Stocks. The stocks were actually popular in Ireland. We do actually have examples of stocks in both Dublin, Kilkenny in particular, Waterford, and Limerick. And basically, it was very popular in Ireland for people to water down alcohol, right? Which, if you know the Irish, we kind of like alcohol. And we used to have testers that used to go around all of the settlements to test the the level of alcohol, and if the local brewer wasn't up to the standard according to the alcohol testers, what an amazing job to have. That person then would be put into the stocks and humiliated amongst the community that, hey, this bar, inn, or tavern is not, selling alcohol that's of the standard. So this was definitely a public humiliation that was done in Ireland
Mm.
to show that, hey, look, you're not up to the standard of the king. Because I think this was at one stage was first originally brought in by the King of England, that there was wine being brought in from Bristol and France that wasn't up to the standard that it should be. This got word to the king, and so these people were put in pillars and stocks as a form of humiliation. And there was other forms as well, because the Irish weren't really into public executions. The pillars and stocks were far more popular in Ireland than just outright beheading someone. So if you couldn't pay a form of compensation, or if you needed to be publicly humiliated and shamed because you weren't selling alcohol up to the standard of the Irish, then this was going to happen to you in medieval Ireland. Um,
Right.
Let me see.
Well, and it's the same thing in a lot of places in mainland in the continent in this period. Bakers who purloin when they receive loaves to bake and they steal some of the dough and they get caught doing that, then they end up in the pillory. Um, Millers who adulterate their product with things that aren't actually grain or that are cheaper grains, they end up in the pillories like this. So it's those kind of what are more like petty quality crimes
mm,
are also punished in a similar fashion all across the continent. And can you imagine if we did this to these businesses who are trying to cheat us by providing inferior products and overcharging us? If we got to put the CEOs in the stocks, wouldn't
mm.
that be great?
Yeah, it
Like,
would
I
be
just
great.
think that's the way we should go about it.
Yeah, 100%. I fully agree with you. Especially when it comes down to giving poor products and stuff. Go back to medieval thoughts is what. Sorry, medieval Ireland is exactly what I think. And somebody was just
Yep.
asking for my records. Majority of the records that I got for the Pillar and Stock was given down from Finn de Wire and his work on the 14th century. I can't remember exactly the first book he did, but he did a second follow up on this as well, which is the Black Death. And he covers a lot more on the Ellis Kettler case as well, which I'll also be covering in this one. And the other sources I got as well was up in the Dublin Museum and up in Christchurch, which has an entire thing as well, covering the literature to do with the pillars and stocks. So that's where I got most of my sources from, was from Christchurch, with their little museum that they have going up there with their literature and that, and also with Finn de Wire's work on the Black Death and the 14th century and stuff. And it's assumed as well that we would have a lot of that stuff still going in the 15th century as well, with the pillars and stocks. Um, oh yes, military. What was it? Mutilation and
Oh,
branding.
mutilation and branding.
So
Yeah.
you're a thief. In particular, what was happening a lot, I was when I was going through the literature, was around 1450. With the return of a lot of gallows glass and kerns into the era, you have the word kern that would appear, and these were basically the bandit forms of the kerns and gallows glass, and they were notorious for both attacking locals and going into settlements and robbing. They would rob and steal when they were going to settlements, and so a deterrent way for these word kerns was to brand them basically as a criminal
Mm,
or mutilate them in
right.
some form of fashion. But branding was very popular for the word currents who wandered into these Anglo-Irish settlements and started sealing. And these word currents, compared to the regular currents who would have been under the protection of the likes of the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers and stuff, these word currents were seen as criminals. They were unwanted,
Right.
outlaws. That, to be fair, a lot of these people today would have been considered people who suffered from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's why a lot of these people would have found it very difficult to find work after the Hundred Years' War, and that's why they may have just continued wandering around the countryside, not sure what to do with themselves, and then getting into a whole load of trouble, and eventually, out of desperation, would have gone into the city area, stealing food
Yeah.
and various other objects and stuff. Eventually, they would have been branded and marked as a filthy woodkern, unwanted by society, or the
Yeah,
wild Irish.
it's kind of a universal truth throughout all of history that the skills needed to be a successful warrior
Mm,
are almost the opposite of the skills you need to be a successful citizen.
yeah.
So and there's throughout all of history, you wonder about how different our history would have been, our progress would have been if we'd acknowledged what we now call PTSD and actually treated these people more kindly and tried to bring them back from the brink instead of just treating them like violent criminals.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, especially today, like I can't say we are any better today because men who are returning now from the Afghan
Mm,
Iraq war who have PTSD, the majority of them sadly are suffering from the homeless crisis. The homeless crisis actually hit them first, more than anyone else. And sadly, because of the rough winters and stuff, a lot of them perish because of they're there drinking, they fall asleep in their sleeping bag, and they
right.
just sadly don't wake up.
Yeah.
And as a society, can we look at ourselves any better than how we treated the returning men from the Hundred Years' War? Even going as far as you can see here, branding the poor man before sending him back into the wilderness again as a branded, unwanted criminal, a man who
And
served.
I
Mm,
right, and I think people underestimate the violation that branding represents because one, there's no antibiotic cream
mm,
that wood kern is going to be able to just apply to the wound, right? So it could actually fester and he could die from infection.
mm,
Two, it's going to leave a scar.
yeah.
And everyone going forward will look at him and know he's a filthy, dirty thief.
Mm,
And they will treat him that way. So he will be an outcast forever,
yeah.
forever. Because I don't know where they were doing the branding in Ireland, but in most places in Europe in this time, it's the forehead.
Mm. And I
It's
assume it's the same
it's
thing
a
as
part of
well.
your body that's really hard to hide.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely not the way you should be treating veterans after their return from war. These people need proper mental health to start with, never mind all the physical damage that's happened to their body, not just left out to the streets to rot for a hard winter to come and collect them. Like, it's just absolutely horrendous. Like, sadly, that's the way things are. Obviously,
Yeah, that's the
most
reality.
notoriously, yeah, obviously, most notoriously, obviously, once again, we're going back to the wood kerns who suffered this the most, and also any Irish that were going into settlements and causing a nuisance and stuff and robbing and stealing and stuff, eventually they would be hung. So if you were going from the countryside as a native Irish person or criminal full stuff from the Anglo-Irish side, and you were going into settlements and you continued to push and push and push, stealing and causing a nuisance in taverns, eventually you're going to be hung. And at this point, it's assumed that there would be no family there to collect your corpse and stuff, because
Right.
you're probably most likely unwanted by even your own clan. This could be an exile or could be a word kern and stuff who's desperate to come into a settlement and start stealing and causing a nuisance. So this was once again another crime for people who were committing petty thievery, going and stealing. So people who were stealing the most were the ones most likely to be hung in 15th century Ireland. And so once again, we try to start off with compensation, negotiating and stuff. But if you're a wood kern or if you're someone who's in exile, there's no one to negotiate for you. There's no one, no family coming to say, actually, he's a decent fella. Here's a bit of coin. Sorry about the problem and stuff. Instead, people are going to
Right.
get more and more annoyed. And after you've been branded, eventually these settlements are going to want to make a show of you, saying, actually, we were sick of these wood kerns and stuff coming in stealing. To deter them, as we were
Yeah.
saying earlier, we're going to hang a few of them and hang them off the gates and stuff and show actually this is unwanted attention. And this started as we go into the period of the Wars of the Roses. This became more and more popular to hang these people off of the gates of Dublin and Cork and also Waterford and Limerick. So this became more of a common sight going into the period of the Wars of the Roses, when we have the likes of the Battle of Piltown and we have the siege in Waterford and stuff, that this became a common trope, that you would have had these poor starving wood kern going into settlements, getting caught stealing and eventually hung from the gate as a deterrent. I can well imagine large content of wood kern were bandits and brigands. Yeah, a lot of the word kerns after returning from the Hundred Years' War did become bandits and brigands. Um, so we can see the counter to this, and we know of this. Well, I know of this from going through the letters that were written from the likes of the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers to the King of England, complaining about the rise in crime and how they needed to send support over to deal with these bandits and brigands, woodkerns, who were now wandering around the countryside in Leinster, specifically Leinster area, causing a nuisance and
Which
problem.
which actually this ties into the video I'm working on Irish clothing in the 15th century.
Mm,
This ties into the sumptuary laws that are passed in Ireland that have nothing to do about sumptus, actually luxury and excess. They actually have everything to do with identity.
mm,
So there are these laws that come in that tell Englishmen to stop dressing and looking Irish, and it's not so much about cultural superiority. A lot of people like to interpret it through that lens, but it's not that at all.
mm,
Because if you read the whole law, it says Englishmen are being mistaken for Irishmen and killed,
yeah.
right, as Irishmen. And then this actually leads to feuds and feudal reprisals. So that actually ties in with the idea of, well, you definitely don't want your Anglo-Irish or just your Anglos looking like Irish because they could easily be taken for these woodkerns, for instance, and just killed out of hand.
Yeah.
So yeah, that ties in with those sumptuary laws really nicely, in
Mm.
fact.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Um, Moving on here, beheading, which did happen in Ireland and was massively frowned upon. Where it became, as we deal later into the 15th century, it became acceptable to make an example of word currents and stuff. Beheading was used against various Irish nobles. In particular, we have the example of Thomas Fitzgerald, who was a member of the Irish Parliament against the English. One of the English nobles came in and had him beheaded for going against the statutes of Kilkenny. And straight away, it caused a complete upheaval in the country. The problem is, if you were to behead anybody or try to make an example of most people who are connected to families, the problem is at this period of the 15th century, most of Ireland is connected. And this is why we have a very complicated relationship with the Anglo-Irish and the native Gaelic people. Because at this point, you're not just related to the families that you're married into. You would have been linked into families that you would have adopted into as well. So you would have had a clan, you're very friendly with that clan. So it's very common to adopt your children into those families. So you're building a bigger network of multiple clans who are all connected together. Furthermore, if you have a clan who's causing a bother or a nuisance and you want them to be a part of your clique and your assemblies and your Irish Parliament and stuff, you'd kidnap or go in there and take a member of their clan as a hostage to make sure that they have good behaviour. So the Fitzgeralds would have gone to all the people in under them and they would have taken hostages from various families. And so if you, for example, take Thomas Fitzgerald and you decapitate him, you have all those families of the Fitzgeralds who suddenly be like, oh, we have all these hostages, we can make all the men of those groups to join us to fight against the English. And that's exactly what happens. You have the families who are connected through hostages, adoption, and plus all the ones that they're married into suddenly rising up, and the English don't know what to do because they think that they can make an example of this which stops all the fighting, and in fact it causes a massive blood feud
Right.
against Dublin itself. So you actually have all of these clans rising up in Ireland, both Anglo-Irish clans and Gaelic clans, coming in to siege and cause riots inside of Dublin. And so beheading does happen, massively frowned upon in Ireland. So it's more of on the don't side. So we try to avoid this, but it does happen in Ireland.
Mm.
Mostly as a punishment for the statutes of Kilkenny. And this is why we try to, this is why the statutes of Kilkenny for the most part is actually ignored in Ireland. And the English would rather just pretend that they didn't put these laws in place, especially later on as we go into the Wars of the Roses in Ireland.
A major, so anyone who's been in the military knows that you should never issue an order you cannot reasonably enforce
Mm,
because it actually just makes you look weak as a leader.
yeah,
So yeah, some Sharia laws are, no matter what, are always tricky to enforce. And when you add the complexity of the cultural situation in Ireland, walk
yeah,
away,
yeah.
walk
Walk away
away.
is right, and that's why in the when we go into the late 15th century, one of the family members, one of the grand sons of the likes of Thomas Fitzgerald and stuff, Garrod Fitzgerald is then referred to as king all but name, because the English can't enforce anything in Ireland without, if they annoyed the Fitzgeralds, they're now fighting all of these clans in Ireland. And in fact, when Henry VIII goes over, he's like, Jesus, can we invade Ireland? They try to do the what was it, the accountancy for it, and see if they can actually pull it off, and they actually can't, because if they get into, they have a little bit of the Silk and Thomas rebellion that happens, and although they do actually beat Silk and Thomas, the damage that was inflicted from a small little region of trying to move into Kildare was so severe to Henry VIII and his resources that he didn't actually have the resources to invade the rest of the country. And it's not until we get into Elizabeth's time that we finally have full invasions from England into Ireland. And that's the thing, is that they have to expect to have a full invasion of the country when England is pinned down with so many other problems from Scotland and France. It's just not worth it for them.
Yeah, yeah. And then eventually in 1699, England gets the idea that they can basically really cause Ireland to submit by, waging a kind of economic war by banning all exports of wool, which kind of crashes the Irish economy in that period. So
Yeah.
eventually they figured that economics are actually the most effective tool of warfare.
It really was. You can see that even in what was it, the 9 Years' War, when you have Hugh O'Neill, who's burning most of the crops. Not Hugh O'Neill himself, but the English actually decide to burn the crops. So yeah, it is far superior to actually burn the Irish out of it more than anything else. I would just want to jump over here to the burning of the Knights Templars, and that burning was actually happening in Ireland, where in Europe we see the burning of a lot more heretics. That's not actually fully the case in Ireland, and we can actually see from the burning of the Knights Templars in 1307 that it causes an impact into Ireland, and it inspires this kind of witch hunt in Ireland to take place. Ireland itself, especially in the Gaelic areas, would have had a lot of herbalists in Ireland. If you look through the word, the Gaelic language, there's no word for witch inside there. It's not actually a Gaelic word whatsoever. Instead, we kind of have white women in the Irish language and
Right.
stuff. So the Irish don't really have an understanding of what is a witch, and it was the same for the Icelanders for a long time as well. It's not until we go into the more of the high and later medieval period that suddenly Icelanders have a word for witch, and then on top of that they start burning their own women and stuff, and they kind of go on a mad frenzy up in Iceland and stuff. But in Ireland, that never really takes root on the Gaelic side. However, on the Anglo-Irish side, we do actually have witch hunts in the likes of Kilkenny, as we have here with the poor Demead, who was the maid to Alice Kettler, who was accused of witchcraft, which once again is kind of although it causes the Anglo-Irish side to start burning a few of their women, one of the best examples obviously in Kilkenny. One thing that's very, very interesting in both cases is, although it seems to cause a frenzy of, okay, who's the heretic, who's the witch, if you actually delve into both cases, and including Joan of Arc, who pops up in the 15th century, we can actually find that there's actually a political motive for all three cases. That in fact is actually, especially with the case of Alice Kettler and
Right.
stuff, somebody owes somebody money. And the best way to get rid of those people, accuse them of witchcraft and heresy, and you can get rid of them. And it's the same thing with Joan of Arc, that we actually find, when we start delving down deeper, that Joan of Arc is causing a nuisance for the likes of the Burgundies, the English, and even the French king is starting to go, oh Jesus, like this Joan of Arc is kind of causing a nuisance. Let's condemn her as a witch and we'll have her burned. So it's very interesting that when we actually look at the background of these women and their relationship to the nobles that are condemning them, is actually a kind of political movement that's going on in the 15th century. So yeah, even in Ireland, if
It
you
is.
are condemned as a witch in this period, the punishment is burning at the stake. However, I just want to make a note of it, that anytime these cases pop up, once again, it comes down to the fact that there is always a political motive. I have noticed that in the Anglo-Irish areas of Kilkenny, Waterford, Dublin and Limerick. So pay a note of that, especially with the Alice Kettler case that pops up in 1324. Just moving on there. See if there's any questions inside there. God, there's a good few of them. We're still depending on demi-kings and bogs at this time. No, there is no demi-kings in the 15th century. So in the 15th century, we have switched over from the old Irish laws and ways of having local petty kings, and then having an over-king on top of that. We've kind of gone more to a period of more kind of late medieval assemblies and Irish parliaments, and having Taoiseachs, head of clans. And we've also gotten away from the whole Tuat system, kind of tribal system that we had in the early medieval period, which was more kind of one culture, one very large family, and one language that they spoke, to more of a clan system of smaller families, multiple small families who were sharing multiple different languages and multiple different cultures. So we've kind of gone more to a clan system in the late medieval period. And so we don't really, as well somebody was saying about the bog bodies, we don't really focus on that as well. And that's why, as I move into this one, pulled apart by horses, which kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about decapitation. Happened in Ireland, very, very frowned upon. We have two major cases that comes to mind, which was the one that happened up in Clare between the O'Briens and the De Clare family. The De Clare family found that the O'Briens weren't keeping to their obligation of being loyal to them, and that they were switching between different families, and depending on the day of the week, they would be with this family one day and they would be with the Clare family the next. And the Clare family found this was completely betraying them, and so they had one of the head of the O'Brien family torn apart by horses, which caused the entire area of Clare to turn completely against the head of Clare at the time, who was a Norman family. They completely turned against him, and they had the Battle of Dice O'Dea, where he was ambushed and killed. And it was the same thing with Art MacMurrough's grandfather, who was pulled apart by horses, which eventually leads to the Gaelic resurgence of Ireland, where the Lordship of Ireland completely falls apart. So I just want to highlight the fact that if you were to turn against an Anglo-Irish lord or an English lord at this period, you could be torn apart by horses. But once again, as we get later into the 15th century, very much frowned upon. The Anglo-Irish like to completely avoid this execution because it could lead to every single clan in this area. Also, on top of that, Anglo-Irish families turning against you as well, because these, at this point now, Anglo-Irish families are also related to the Gaelic families, and they kind of have to, follow the flow of everyone else. So you could have pretty much the entirety of Ireland turning against you at this period if you were to pull something like this, quite literally, in the 15th century.
Right. Yeah.
Um, just moving on to the last one
Oh,
here.
Jean d'Arc's king was an ungrateful git. Yes, he was. You are correct, Susan. He's
Just popping into I think this is the last one. Yeah, this is the very, very last one here. To be hung, drawn, and quartered was mostly a punishment dished out by the King of England against locals, and these things would have happened at the very end of a very large scale war that would have happened in Ireland. You would have seen this mostly in the 16th and 17th century, but you also had seen this in the the 16th century as well, and also in the 15th century, where you had very large scale wars that would have all kicked off. The King of England, because he considers himself the ruler of Ireland, if he would have eventually captured you and considered you a traitor against his ownership of Ireland, he would have then brought you to London, where you would have been dragged across the street. Most likely, sometimes you were put against, a wooden plank. I think it's a wooden plank or a wooden table. You were tied onto that. But some cases, you were literally just dragged half to death up the road to Tiber in London, I'm sure. And then you would have hung. And then when you were somewhat, your the adrenaline started to kick in your body and stuff, you were then cut down. You were then drawn with your organs and stuff torn out. And then eventually, as you can see there in the last photo, you were quartered, you were torn, hacked to death. And then your body parts would have been sent back to Ireland. And then you would have been sent to the various kingdoms of Ireland, such as you would have been sent over to the north of Ireland, you would have been sent over to Connacht, you would have then been sent over to Cork, and also your other body parts would have been sent to Dublin as well. And your head would have been kept in London. which also causes problems with the clans as well, because the clan would have eventually wanted your head to be returned to Ireland, because these clans then would have gone out of their way to try to reclaim these body parts, and so they would have looked for London to send the head back, which causes a lot of problems because London does not want to send the head back. In fact, they actually lost the head. It was one of the O'Byrnes who was killed up in the Wicklow Mountains. The O'Byrne clan had written to Queen Elizabeth to return the head of Byrne because they believe in the resurrection. They believe that Jesus will eventually come back to the earth and resurrect all of the people buried beneath the earth. And so this was really important to the O'Byrne clan to have this head returned back to them in Wicklow. And the Queen Elizabeth didn't do this. In fact, she actually supposedly lost the head. The head was missing, which really annoyed the
Well,
O'Byrnes very much so. And they also heard that the head was also disrespected when it was in London and stuff, that it was probably thrown into a ditch or something, and this got back to the O'Byrnes, which really, really annoyed them as they entered into the 9 Years' War. They had absolutely no problems joining the 9 Years' War against Queen Elizabeth because of the amount of disrespect that was given to one of the head of the O'Byrnes at the time, the Taoiseach, who was killed, who, according to the O'Byrnes, wasn't even acceptable behaviour even to start with. So I think that's pretty much it.
well, well, and I think I wanted to add that something we didn't talk about when we talked about drawing and quartering earlier. It's the you mentioned it. The medieval idea is that you need to be buried in consecrated grounds so
Mm,
that when Christ comes back, you can be resurrected. So these people who are being hanged, drawn, and quartered with their body parts sent everywhere and none of them being buried,
mm,
that's almost a double condemnation.
yeah.
And in fact, the second condemnation is worse than the first because the second one is condemning you to not get to experience the life to come.
Mm,
So yeah, it's again, it's something our modern we can't understand because most of us don't believe that anymore. So for us, just the physical aspect is horrifying, but actually the spiritual aspect would have been equally horrifying,
mm.
probably.
Yeah, it's quite hardcore, right? Once again, very much frowned upon, but for the most part, the English sort of get away with this execution because it would have been a part of a very long, drawn out war against the Irish. So you mostly would have seen someone being hung, drawn, and quartered when things would have already escalated up to the radical extremes, especially of violence towards the English and the Irish. Um, so at this point, it's like, why not chuck in hung, drawn, and quartering, especially in 16th century Ireland. So yeah, that's pretty much us finish crimes and punishment during the 15th century. Um, any other questions or anything off anybody? And I'll quickly switch back over to Rachel. Stop sharing that. And
The stream
actually,
has ended. Cricket noise.
yeah, I'll quickly move my face over
That's
to where it
that's what's on
belongs.
my screen. Like, what? Discord, you're so funny.
It is funny, all right. Like, does that work? Yeah, like William Wallace. Yeah, William Wallace was another person that was hung, drawn, and quartered. He had a proper vicious
Yep.
execution as well. His executioner was so trained up on how to hung, draw, or quarter someone professionally that William's heart was cut out so quickly that it was still beating to the crowd. So he actually brought up, he was very, very trained in that he actually brought the heart up and actually showed the crowd for a good few seconds. And so for historians researching that, it really does show that Edward the First's executioner compared to Henry VIII's executioner, Henry the First's executioner was really trained up on how to be a very good butcher at the period. And he did little tricks like that. Like when William was still alive, he was showing him his own entrails and stuff, and people remembered how quickly William's eyes were flickering around his head and stuff. So he was very, as we were saying earlier, we had your
Yeah.
man with the trained sword and stuff. William the First's executioner was more trained up on how to be a complete savage than anything else, especially to his poor victims.
Some interesting questions. I wonder if they ever find random legs from the late medieval period. Well, they do in Irish bogs for certain.
Yeah, even today,
They
so we
find
did.
random body parts all the time.
We actually found, so in the Viking Age, early medieval Viking Dublin. There's a lot of actually decapitated heads that are found both in Dublin and actually in York as well, because decapitation was very popular with the Vikings because it was very romanticized, head collecting and stuff. And so if you did a crime in Dublin, for example, and you ended up decapitated, your head was then put on a spike outside of Dublin walls. And
What?
from there, eventually, what they would do with the head afterwards is that they actually threw it into the river, and it actually the skulls got collected. And so there's actually a load of decapitated head finds in Dublin. So yeah, we're still finding a load of finds even today.
Yeah. I didn't, it's funny. I was thinking about archaeologically, we don't, so you might get the impression that they were drawing and quartering people all the time. They
Mm,
weren't.
yeah.
It was like the ultra punishment. So it's not like there would be thousands upon thousands of legs floating around the archaeological record.
Mm,
And bones do disintegrate over time depending on the soil conditions, or animals might have eaten them.
yeah.
So yeah, no, we definitely haven't found limbs so much.
Not
Skulls,
so much.
yeah. And
Yeah.
in bogs, you still find random body parts.
Yeah.
There was a foot they found in a Irish bog, I think, and it had the shoe, but just a foot, like nothing
Jesus, I
else.
wonder what happened there.
Just the shoe in the foot.
Yeah. That's very fascinating. Um,
Then there was a question, what happened in cases between the Anglo-Irish and the Gaelic Irish?
a lot of compensation. Most of the time, it would have been compensation, except for if others were involved and stuff. But if you're talking about Gaelic clans and Anglo-Irish clans, because at this point they're kind of more clans. The Anglo-Irish are more kind of clannish than anything else, especially if you're dealing with a situation like that where you've got an Anglo-Irish clan that has a disagreement with a Gaelic clan for various reasons. Let's say if a member of the Anglo-Irish kills a member of the Gaelic to prevent pretty much all of society turning against that one person, they would pay compensation. So they would meet up, they would negotiate with the Brehon. The Brehon was the judge who would be brought over. He would be summoned by the likes of the Fitzgeralds or Butlers over, and he would have been brought over, and he would have, you know, spoken to families. They would meet up in specifically probably a church or various other places that would have been organized for a meeting. They would have discussed what was happening, what happened, sorry, the status of the people, because that's really important to the compensation that needs to be paid. And then eventually, are there, depending on what, does the Anglo-Irish person live in the countryside, or does the Anglo-Irish person live in the urban settlement? That's very important, because then if the person lives in the countryside, quite easy then there'll just be a little bit of a cattle what was it? God, the word's gone completely over my head. He'll give over cattle anyway. But if they live in the city side, it'll be a little bit more complicated, because even to the person who lives in the city, the whole system will be very alien to them. But they will pay some form of compensation,
Right.
most likely through money. And then with that money, then they'll be able to purchase themselves a cow and stuff. So that's pretty much what would
It's
happen, is that they would pay compensation.
I was just thinking, so when you say the countryside, are we talking about like manorial kind of situations where you have a manor and there's different people of different, like the whole clan living together on a manor? Are we talking about just like individual cottages scattered across the countryside? Because the latter seems like a bad plan to just
You would
live
have
individually,
individual.
whereas,
Yeah, you would have what was it? Roundhouses that would be dotted throughout the country and stuff, and then you would obviously have tower houses. Most of this would have happened in tower houses, so you may come across like roundhouses just kind of dotted here and there. With a few other tower houses and stuff. Most of them close by.
mhm.
Especially if I was to do it, I'd make sure to do it next to a tower house. So there's a lot of, in the 15th century Ireland, there's a lot of tower houses here and there and everywhere. So in case, as we were saying earlier, a woodkern comes knocking at the door to cause a nuisance, everyone would go over to the tower house and they
Right.
would bring their cattle with them. We were actually discussing this last week, myself and a few other people. Um, what was it about what happens during a cattle raid, because a cattle raid is most likely going to happen, is that everybody from their own houses would run towards the tower house and they would bring their cattle. Like, they wouldn't really bring anything else. It's mostly the cattle. They're trying to protect the cattle, so they try to bring it to the round house.
Mm,
But it's very, very, very debatable because some castles have space for cattle, other castles don't have space for the cattle.
Right.
And then it's the debate. Okay, so what's the purpose of the tower house? Is it to protect the road and so on and so forth? But yeah, most of the time you would have a tower house there, and tower house is kind of also the place where you have your main assemblies with the clans and stuff. And that's pretty much how the
Oh,
country
okay.
was organized. Is that once a month, once a week, or even once a year, they would all have assemblies where all the clans meet up and discuss how they're going to organize themselves. And then representatives of that assembly would then go to, a higher up again and a higher up again. And then between alliances then that you've seen between the likes of the O'Neills, the Fitzgeralds, the O'Donnells, the O'Connors, they would then meet up for one major assembly amongst themselves. And then you would have had the two major representatives of both groups, which would have been the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers. They would have met up then at the Assembly of the Foreigners, which is called the Irish Parliament, and then they would discuss how they would run the country from the perspective of the English over on the other side. But they may have other assemblies outside of that as well, but it's hard to actually work out how that would have worked because the literature's burned and missing and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. 1921, good year.
Yeah, good
Actually,
times.
Korea has a similar, in 1921, there was a horrible earthquake in Japan,
Oh
in
no.
Tokyo, and there were a lot of medieval Korean treasures that had been borrowed from Korea during the Japanese occupation. And because Tokyo went up in flames,
Ooh.
all of those medieval Korean treasures also went up in
Oh
flames.
no.
So
That's actually
bad
disgusting.
year, bad
Yeah,
year
yeah.
for historical documents. We
Ugh.
have one more question. How often was collective punishment an accepted practice?
Collective punishment, as in the whole clan, all the time. It was the best way to be. It was way better to have one clan. So how it worked in Ireland, and it was just so effective, is if you got the entire clan out, and they met up in a church or a castle and something in front of the entire other clan. All the other clans are there watching and stuff. You being given out to by the Brehon, the judge, and then you having to pay the charge of a cow that you really need for the next winter, the next summer and stuff. Because a cow give in Ireland, a cow gives so much. I know it seems slightly backwards, but you have to remember that would have given cat what was it dairy, you know, especially dairy at that period when it gives out milk, butter, and various other stuff that's
Cheese,
vitally
cheese,
important.
baby. Cheese, cheese, cheese.
Cheese is another really, really good one. And then itself, even when the cattle passes away, the amount of beef and all the other useful stuff that you can get out of a cattle, if you have to then give that as compensation to another family publicly in front of everyone, that's not only is it embarrassing and undermines you, because you have to remember you would have had your clan has a role in society of governing other families, and if you're suddenly publicly humiliated in front of your other clans and families that you're supposed to also govern, that's a loss of status. And then eventually those other
Right.
clans are like, why are we being told what to do off this troublemaker? And they might just turn against that clan and stuff. So, and then never mind. So let's say if I have I was very bold, I killed the neighbor, and I now need to pay compensation. When I go back to my roundhouse or wherever I'm going back to with the rest of my clan, they're all looking at me at the time going, no, you're going to suffer. We're going to find a way to punish you behind closed doors. And they're not going to let you down. Not only is society itself turning around and saying, you shouldn't have that status, but you also have your whole entire family that's turned against you because they all had to suffer as a group. So it's actually in 15th century Ireland, compensation is, and throughout all of Irish medieval history, compensation is very, very dominant. The Normans tried to bring in more corporal punishments, as we were saying earlier about O'Brien, who's torn apart by horses and stuff, and it ends up completely backfiring. It causes multiple blood feuds where families aren't turning around and saying, oh God, he deserved that. No, they're turning around, actually, that's my cousin. I really loved my cousin. How dare you? And then they're getting involved with a blood feud, and everyone is within that society. Even people who are, their family members would have been taken hostage from the O'Briens aren't turning around and saying, this is a good time to riot. They're in fact turning around and say, oh shit, I better do something because my other family might get their head cut off. So I'll actually join in with that fighting as well and go against the Normans. So
Right.
physical punishments do not work in medieval Ireland. It's compensation. It works wonders and it keeps
Mm.
everybody knitted together, especially when you need clans to come together for assemblies, govern how the society is going to work, and then eventually with the chain of command, all of Ireland should be ticking the way it should be. So yeah, it was very effective.
Yeah, I think compensation definitely works when there's a better socioeconomic distribution of resources.
Yeah. Oh.
Um, when you end up with massive disparities between rich and poor, and the
Mm,
poor are probably the ones being driven to the desperation of crime, then they don't have anything to pay in compensation, and that's where you get the rise of, physical punishment
yeah.
instead of compensation,
Yeah.
is
That's
my
a very
theory, and I'm sticking to it.
yeah, and you can see that with the word current. Yeah, the solidly you can see that with the word current, the poor word current, unwanted by society.
Right.
Yeah, we definitely learned a lot today, and as we were saying earlier in the comments section, if we
We
don't
did.
learn of what happens, why crimes and punishment in the 15th century ultimately didn't really work in both Bohemia and in Ireland, and then we go into the modern period of why Czech Republic and Ireland today does not do physical punishments like that anymore. You can see why, the word currents, they should not have been executed. They shouldn't have gotten to a point where they were being executed in Dublin. They should have been provided what they needed, which was, as we have a better understanding today, they should have been given the help that they needed. And it's the same thing with a lot of criminals in Dublin. They shouldn't have gotten to a stage where they were resorting and stealing. They should have been provided what they needed because of the opportunities of good jobs, good economics.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, it wasn't really them to blame, and we should be learning from those problems. So, yeah, I think between the comment section and ourselves, we definitely did learn a lot today.
Yeah, I agree. It's
Mm.
been a good chat, everyone. We thank you all for joining us today. We're gonna keep going with these live chats every week. So
Mm.
stay tuned for more learning adventures.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. And Rachel, I want to thank you so much for the work that you've done this throughout the entire week. We've been under a ton of stress this week because we've been trying to quickly adapt to the algorithm, which suddenly spiked this week. I think it was about Tuesday, where it kind of hit its peak with the Kingdom Come
Yep.
Deliverance. And because the two of us are mad into the 15th century, we wanted to kind of run with the algorithm, and it especially spiked up with crimes and punishments. So we had about a week to quickly, and all the top on top of that, all the other work we had, especially with Rachel, quickly doing a video for myself to cover my own back with all the work I've been doing with Kingdom Come as well on my channel, pretty much a live stream every single day. Rachel was trying to go between multiple projects all at once, and I just want to, Rachel, thank you so much for quickly adapting to what's going on. It means so much to myself,
Oh,
and I hope everybody really does appreciate the work that you've done both in your own channel and over my channel. Thank you, Rachel, for that.
oh, my pleasure. Ever since you reached out to me, it's just been one roller coaster.
Then on the second video, she's going to be
Yep.
posting that over on her channel, which is on 15th century women. So make sure you pay attention to that one. So that will be really important, especially with further understanding of this subject.